292. Tainted Fields 2. 10th. 10th. The Human Kingdom Lands of Kaval. A land of knights. A land of warriors. Edna's stint on the 9th world was short, so she and Kafa landed in the 10th world to find one filled with knights and demons. It was something like Satria, and yet not. It was too familiar, and yet that familiarity also evoked a sensation within the lizard folk. I am starting to feel a little sick of traveling. Kafa mused as a joke. It was only partly one. Edna agreed. Traveling too much does weigh on one's soul. I think I understand why Ha was just eager to let go of worlds. At some point, I think I wouldn't be able to care. Edna stared, and wondered how that escalated quickly. The lines between a stare and a glare were so thin. You should be like that. That will be our slow death. Kafa looked back. You're made of stronger stuff than I am, Lady Edna. I see these new worlds, and I realize at some point, why should I care? A part of me speaks to return to my familiar lands. Lands that are safe. As long as our homes are safe. Death. Edna answered. We cannot be the only island in a sea flooded with demons. Death comes to us eventually. Together, with a coalition of the living, we can create a wall. Kafa sighed. That was true. I know. But this has been a lot more tiring than I expected. I thought the worlds would be interesting, but now we are in the 10th peripheral world, and even if they are interesting, I wonder to myself whether I should care anymore. Edna tapped the lizard warrior on his armored scales. Because we must. Because we are the only ones that can care for these worlds that are no longer cared for. I know you are right. Kafa said, but he looked at the world and felt a little blank. This is the burden of our existence, and we may have traveled a little too much. Edna nodded. Let's get a break. We can return home and rest. I suppose we do need it. I will continue on with the others. Kafa nodded. I certainly do need some time back home. It was so tempting to relegate the world to just something of a copy-paste of another world. Even when none of the worlds they've been to were actually proper mono-human societies. This was a world with only humans, and they fought demons. Naturally, in mono-race societies, anything or anyone that doesn't resemble that mono-race is automatically assumed to be a monster. Or a demon. Both, if the demons had possession and corruption abilities, and that race had inherited trauma from past parasitic demons. We still see this in the southern continent, where some humans still experience micro-flinches at the sight of non-humans. Perhaps not outright hostile, but a reaction nonetheless. Well, to be fair, this human world fits your powers like a glove. Kafa laughed a few days later as they explored the world of Kaval. On the other hand, I could think of about 100 or 2 other Valthorns and allies that would benefit from this world. Edna countered. There were also many others who could exploit a world of multiple city-states. Maybe the next one is a sandworld. I don't like sand. I know. Some lizard folks claim it gets between our scales and makes everything nasty. Kafa answered, and so Edna chuckled. I thought some lizard folks are native to the sands. Some. Kafa said. I am not one of those. I am the swamp kind, and sand irritates me. Then we should visit a swamp world. I bet there's one. Maybe not the peripheral worlds, but beyond that. The 10th peripheral world of Kaval was one of not many gimmicks. It was just humans and demons. Its population was fairly large, and in the past, the city-states that received heroes from the old gods prospered. But somehow, the cities never quite formed up into large empires. Its social structure was also fairly similar to the humans of the 8th peripheral world, and even the old human empires of Treehome. The feudal aspects naturally reoccurred throughout the multiverse, and that was a fairly sad thing to think about. I believe it's a product of the power and combat-based systems. Societies where the powerful can exert power much more easily over the weak would naturally be more feudal, simply because there is no check or balance on the authority of the strong. Well, any views? Edna asked. Kafa just sighed. If what we want is gaming the odds of getting talent, I suppose this isn't a bad place. It has most of the basic resources, and with Eons' influence, it should be possible to turn this world into a farm for soldiers over a few decades. Overall, where would you place it? Below the mage world, and that overpopulated world? Or even the 3-ringed world? Hell, at least Landis has a magic tree. This world of humans is a little ordinary to be worth a clone. Ordinary could be good. Mountain World is fairly ordinary as it goes, and it is now our core world. Then why choose? We could just roll the dice. Kafa said. Each world has a ceiling for population size it can comfortably absorb, a ceiling to its mana output. I suppose given this world's ordinary design, it should have a fairly balanced mix of resources, so that's one thing going for it. Edna laughed. You're perfectly right. Alright, I am not going to tease you more. We should keep going. The seemingly ordinary world of Kaval wasn't totally ordinary, once they started to investigate the heroes and defenses of the various city-states of Kaval. There were segments of uniqueness to it, such as the many magical swords on the world of Kaval. The heroes of Kaval, when they were summoned long ago, would also arrive with something called the seed of the hero sword. Each hero would then, through their own growth journey, grow this sword seed into a magical weapon worthy of them, and throughout the world of Kaval, there were hundreds of remnant hero swords, left by earlier heroes. Completed hero swords were extremely powerful, they contained a large fragment of the hero's power that grew as the hero developed over time. Even incomplete hero swords, left by the heroes that died too young or early, were still decently powerful artifacts. Interestingly, the journey of the heroes of Kaval also takes them through the path of gathering the swords made by previous heroes, to add the power of the old heroes' swords to their arsenal of abilities. Naturally, I began to wonder why these worlds were this way. Did the planetary core influence how a world's heroes worked? Lumuf held up the strange object in his hands, and willed it to activate. We could feel the power of a divine artifact. It twisted the world so viscerally that anyone nearby would have felt as if the world itself was torn apart to create the small tunnel. It linked the world, and Hawa, if only momentarily, for us to speak. It felt like a sheer waste of divine energy, but then again, what could be more important than the exchange of information between two multi-world powers? A part of me was repulsed by that sort of overbearing thoughts, but a large part of me embraced the reality long ago. I was wondering when you would have more questions. Well, then I finally have them. Why do heroes seem different from world to world? How exactly does the hero class work? It is not too much of a stretch to say that it is a trade made with the system. We petition that system for heroes that are adapted to defeat the demon kings. The hero classes themselves are created through the system. Think of it as visiting a merchant, and you tell the merchant that you wish to purchase a weapon with a certain set of attributes, and a certain set of skills. The merchant would then go to the back of its room, and after searching and cobbling things together, it would then offer you a selection. I paused. Then the mental controls on the heroes. Our earliest attempts to summon heroes cost us too much of our faith points. We gave heroes all the power at the very start, only to find that they misused our gifts. Rather than deal with the demons, the heroes summoned did everything else. In quite a few worlds, the heroes ended up destroying everything. They were a medicine that killed its patients. A cure worse than the disease. This was something I long suspected. So, as a whole, we imposed conditions on the heroes. Many of the gods came together, back when the world was much smaller, to collectively control heroes. The heroes were a very sharp knife, and we wanted it directed specifically at the demons. Then the worlds. Each hero class, offered to us to choose, is a combination of our parameters, and the restrictions imposed by each world. We cannot summon a dragonling hero to a world without dragonlings. We cannot summon a lizardman hero to a world with only humans. These conditions are within each world's inherent conditions. In worlds where everyone uses magic, working with the world's restrictions and conditions reduces our faith point cost. Think of each core as a micro world with its own rules. Overcoming the rules costs faith points. Working with the rules reduces our faith points. It already costs us too much to pluck heroes from the source worlds and then send them over to these demon-attacked worlds. We listened. But why do the core worlds have these rules? Where did they come from? At the heart of that question, is a question of our origin. That is something I do not know the answer for. Even we wonder what truly is our origin story. Where we came from remains a mystery to even the most ancient of us. But surely worlds and rules come from somewhere. In the early years, there was an idea that we are all creations of dreams. The unused radiant thoughts of the source worlds. It remains to be proven. But I digressed. Each world has its own rules. Overcoming them has a price. There were questions. For my core worlds, I am able to alter the core's rules directly, because I exert control over their core. I can weave my divine laws into them, and change how each of these different worlds function. There are limitations imposed by the system, but ultimately, it is all a matter of faith points. Then, can the heroes gain divinity? I am afraid not. It is an inherent restriction of the hero class. The hero class is a borrowed power. A god cannot borrow its power from another. Even those freed. Those that escaped from the mental restrictions and altered the hero class. That is not supposed to happen. But no. The power remains borrowed. The hero class is linked to a store of divine power from the system. I see. Colette's chances of having a domain is nil. Unless she gives it up but they can trade their hero class for other classes. Yes. But there is a cap. There is a distance they will have to climb on their own merit. I see. But then, I look at the heroes, and remembered there was a question I really wanted to ask. Why the heroes? Why pick them from the source worlds? Because they have the best souls. Really? I found that hard to believe. What you see is after the system's meddling. But the souls of those from the source worlds are most suited for the perils of interdimensional travel. I thought about the question that the heroes asked. Do they really return to their source worlds after they die? Can they go home? I have no ability to send them back, so I am not certain. But the system claims they will, so they will. How? Is it really a lie? What is the system? I have no answer to that. Know that what is created across many worlds are often random. Worlds that cannot self-sustain simply collapse, and those that can are all that remain. Unusual and different, but they have reached a point where they can function as self-sufficient worlds. At least, until the demons threaten to consume us all. At this point, I felt the powers of the divine artifact wane. It would need some time to recharge. There is no need to worry, we will speak again. We had answers, but we still had more to do. Fifth World, Magisar. Lausanne and Aben looked at each other during a short break. Just a while ago, they helped the Magisarian humans out of the rubble. Some of these humans, who didn't want to live under the rule of the Tower Masters, left the tower and decided to strike it out in the vast wilderness. The wilderness, filled with monsters and the demon golems, plants and demonic hybrid plants, was a hostile environment, but these refugees decided rolling the dice was worth it, at least compared to the cramped and slum-like living standards of the towers. This group of refugees were not that big. Just about 100 people. Are you really from another world? The leader of the refugees was a relatively strong mage at about level 52. He was supported by a group of 13 level 40 mages. Yes, Hoya's calming presence worked like a charm. To the refugees, she was the presence of the divine itself, a woman of tremendous holiness that even the mages cannot help but believe. The man stared. But I am not the hero. The heroes of Magisar, at least, some time ago, used to arrive once every 2 to 3 decades. Not enough to quell the Demon King's reign, but enough to buy time. The 100 or so were fed, and given food. The food provided had to be plant-based, because the differences in blood type were then immediately noticeable. They vomited when given meat from other worlds. It was alien meat to them, and their bodies, though similar in appearance, were not able to tolerate the meats from the other worlds. At least they responded to the healing energies, and that sort of energy transfer still worked. There would be a lot of things to study. The interactions of the Magisarian humans with all the different types of materials available would be something they needed to check. Despite the natural magical aptitude of the Magisarians, if the side effects of their body were serious, it may seriously hinder their ability to operate offworld. Lausanne snuck into Gorfort Tower. It wasn't difficult. Aligning one's mana to the frequencies of the teleportation spell was fairly simple, compared to the mana attunement required to travel through demonic rifts. Every single level 125 Valthorn is familiar with the basics, even advanced versions of a few other major disciplines. They had to be, because out in the fields, it was really hard to know what the other worlds could throw at them. Even if they didn't receive a class in those unrelated class trees, the skills and knowledge still helped their overall performance. How is it in there? Aben asked via their message network. He was located a distance away, clearing out the demonic hives. It was quite easy to locate more refugees, once they figured the patterns. The refugees generally preferred wide open spaces where it's hard for the golems to surprise them. So, rather than look for easily defended places, the mages exploited wide open spaces where they have range and it is easy for them to use spells. It's surprisingly sad. Lausanne found the living conditions terrible. Due to the space scarcity in the towers, everyone was crammed into a small space. Ultimately, Lumuf's information guided them to one of the mages they stalked. The mage Meteria Hudrot lived in a small room, just big enough for a bed, and 4 shelves. There were no bathrooms, and instead, for their level, the bathrooms were shared by a few units together, similar to a dorm. She lived in a less pleasing place when she was lower leveled. Under level 30, a mage was pretty much just a peon, and would only have a bed and a small box as their personal living space. Even children were centrally managed. For the low-level mage parents, they were pretty much living in tiny rooms with stacked beds. Who's there? Meteria Hudrot looked around, and Lausanne smiled. Who are you? It was easy to tell they were different. Their skin tones were different. Their build was different. Lausanne had dense, lean muscles throughout her body, while Meteria was thin, almost bony. Unlike Lausanne's rounded joints, the Magisarian humans lacked the muscle mass and their joints protruded from their skinny frames. Lausanne knew it wasn't the diet. She knew of humans that strictly consumed vegetables that still had muscle mass. This difference was in their blood and genes. Their stick-thin appearance is a norm. Hello. I'd like to talk. What? I am sent by the man you saw during your mission a few weeks ago. The man that vanished. Meteria's eyes immediately widened. It wasn't an illusion. Of course. Now, will you come with me? Lausanne approached her, and suddenly a magical portal appeared right next to Lausanne. Meteria gulped. Where are we going? Somewhere we can talk in greater detail. There were probably a million questions going through the mage's mind, but it was important to learn more about the tower masters of the various towers, before making contact. So, they had to infiltrate and learn about their society from the middle, where they had enough knowledge and access to see the bigger picture. Lausanne would try to contact Meteria's master, next. It would be easier if Meteria could do the introductions. They would slowly find potential allies, learn about the various tower masters' pain points and weaknesses, and see how they could absorb these towers into the fold peacefully. By Lausanne's own estimates, Eon had much to offer these Magisarians. She only hoped that they were wise enough to accept the deal. Announcement. Oh look, Avitu's book is on Amazon. Unliving Book 1. For the longest time, Idine Fyakna had only one prescient wish, to be the daughter her parents could take pride in. The idea was a tall order, especially as her father stood at the head of the Templar Order, and her grandfather as the Pope. However, she endeavored to try nonetheless. Yet fate had a different path in store for her. For all her efforts, all her best laid plans, were but the broken off crumbs of one day. That day, she was brutally slain by a vile, accursed undead being. Though, not even restful eternity awaited her in death. She awakened inside a coffin. Her coffin. During her own funeral wake. Discovering, to her horror, that she had risen. Not somehow resurrected. No, but back in the form of that most hated of beings, the curse of the undead. 293. Floodplains. 293. Year 274. Eon. It's been a year since we started exploring the peripheral worlds, and we were now in our 11th world. I began to feel the strain of the expanding world. The Valtrian order now stretched across more worlds, and each of them required resources. Shipment of goods. Even mana. Stella and her growing team of void mages worked overtime to send people over, but ultimately, we had to decide on the placement on the node trees. Without node trees, the void mages would be fully tasked with the movement of people and resources, and this strained our void mages. Our void mages were a fairly limited group in the first place. There were about 2,000 void mages, but most of them were relatively mid-levels around level 60 to 90. Then, there's about 1 to 200 void mages that we considered to be deployable, a decent number, but for movements to these faraway places, it is mainly the void archmages and their peers that did the work. With my domain holders leading the exploration, I directed my own attention on the industry growth. I needed the drain on resources by some of the worlds in repair, such as Tropics World, to taper off. But luckily, it was not bad news. Because for the world of Treehome, the reality bubble expanded, and then, I felt something exceptional happen. In the faraway distance, at the edge of space itself, I could somehow see past the bubble that separated Treehome's reality, and the endless void sea. Using the vision of the void layers granted and shared with me, it was as if there was a world birthed within the void itself. At that moment, I saw thousands of worlds, floating as if suspended in a dormant state. Each world was encased in a package of void energies. The void sea is the spawning pool of the world. It is the primordial soup, and from my point of view, I believe, it was only something I could see. Because through my domain, through my empowerment of Treehome's core, I could see the energy of the core stretch into the void itself, and then, it searched. I didn't know how, or what it did. But it searched through the void sea, as if looking for something that matched. Then it found one. A world somehow with land and water encased in a strange liquid sac within the void sea. I felt the core's authority spread into that liquid sac, and it pulled. It pulled, and pulled. It felt like forever. It felt like just a moment, and the reality bubble of Treehome suddenly bulged as that new world in the sac made contact with the wall. It was as if a larger soap bubble joined with a smaller soap bubble, and then, a new world entered into Treehome's reality. It drifted, then drifted and settled in an outer orbit around Treehome's sun. And so, Treehome now has a sister planet. My forces arrived on the sister planet to find it already populated and with plants and people. A dream from the core of Treehome filled in the blanks. A world that existed entirely within the Void Sea in a state of limbo. It exists, but imperfectly. The Void Sea is the cradle of worlds. I strangely found it similar to something from my past life. This new world was as if a program that was in development, but never went live. It ran in a test environment all this while, but when it was pushed to the live environment, it inherited all the history it created during the test environment. The sister world of Treehome, which I now called Shrubhome, shared the same racial mix as Treehome, and it came already present with a decently sized population. How? Most of my forces didn't understand. Or maybe they did, but it was a reality that was hard to swallow. For us from Earth or the source worlds, it was hard to grasp whether we were dealing with reality. How was a world that didn't exist before, suddenly exist with its own history in what felt like a few days? In a way, it was simpler to think of this new world as one that exists in a realm separate from ours, and now it moved across the realms to join us. Because the implications of a world created out of scratch meant we were all simulations. That our existence could be created out of the blue by the Void Sea. The mages were surprisingly more willing to accept it. To them, if summons were real, then creations of a world with its own history could be real. For me personally, I found it easier to think of this sister world as a world that was teleported in, to be our celestial neighbor. Shrubhome was a smaller world. Smaller, but still had seas and continents, similar to Treehome. It had 3 large continents, and my forces arrived to find existing kingdoms and nations already squabbling. There were no domain holders here. Not a single one, and the strongest person we sensed, as only in the level 50s. We spoke to some of the leaders of Shrubhome, and it seems, from their point of view, they were always there, and when they looked up to the skies and the sun, Treehome was always in their star maps. Again, if magic can do so much, creating worlds out of thin air should be doable. But damn, it was hard to truly accept. Somehow, the flow of energies on Shrubhome was also the same as Treehome. This was a world where the core is actually linked to Treehome's core. I sensed the same energy from Shrubhome's core. The core was a physical object, but in Treehome's case, now it was split into 2. I wondered whether this was a form of defense mechanism. A demon king needed to capture both cores in order to fully control the world. 11th world. Shan, land of sands and floods. Demons are gigantic fire demons but expansion curtailed by the sands. Sand. Johann picked up a handful of sand, and the sand was blown away by the wind. It was fine sand, high quality, even. But sand. The sun was bright, and there was not a single cloud in the sky. The sand, the heat, the cloudless sky all reminded them of the scorpionoid lands of Jonpu. Well, looks like we found the world to fulfill our promise to Jonpu. Rune smiled. Kefri would enjoy this place. Is something going on with you and Kefri? Izar asked. Rune shook his head. Nothing. There was nothing, and there's still nothing. At one point, Chung was pursuing her. He's dying soon. You have a chance. Rune made an exaggerated retching expression. Please. At some point I'm going to prefer to be partnerless. I have a partner. Izar admitted. And she's cute. I hope to have many babies with her. Rune paused as he looked into the distance. There was a very faint scent of some kind of human presence. I didn't know that. Is it a fairly recent thing? Izar nodded. Yeah, we got together recently. At least, before this whole peripheral worlds thing. I kinda miss her already. The ranger pointed in a direction, and the 3 began to move. Well, maybe you should head back and go make some babies. I think there's really no need for 3 of us in a single world. Izar shrugged. The 3 of us are meant to offset Lumuf and Edna's significantly higher levels. But yeah, I should make babies. I know. Rune laughed. But yeah, look, humans. Again. That's good. Johann joined in and the 3 activated their illusionary spells. They needed to stalk the natives and learn more about them before making the first contact. Eon would love to have a look at your kids. Izar nodded. Eon's medical care would be indispensable. I know what you mean. Izar said. I'm curious too. I just hope there's no complications for the mother. Is she human? Where's she from? Rune asked. Yeah, she's an enchanter working for the Valthorns. She helped make one of the pieces of my gauntlets. Oh, sweet. At least she isn't an outsider. That hardly works well, Rune said. There's Valthorns married to folks outside the order, and that can get a little messy if things get leaked. Izar squirmed. What usually happens is the outsider gets absorbed in, but that can be a little traumatic for the partner. Rune explained. There were information access tiers to the order, and for domain holders, they pretty much had full access. As one goes down the order's ranks, the access tiers decreased. It's monitored by the artificial minds, to ensure key information remains secure. There wasn't 100% security. Not with the various kinds of espionage skills and surveillance spells, but we have been fairly successful in controlling data leakages with a huge network of artificial minds and Patrick's perpetual mind scanning abilities. You need to tell me more. Later, Izar said as the three snuck close and followed the human caravan traveling through the sands. The trio didn't take long to start noticing the unusual creatures of this desert world. 1. There were sandbirds. They were part sand, part spiritual creatures that were more like elementals than actual animals. There were many other larger creatures, like a gigantic sandfish that resembled a transparent fish but with sand as its skin. They were just native animals made of sand. Then, the vegetation was also different. Despite the strong sunlight, the plants they have were skinny, brown-colored things. Instead, these plants were drawn to magic, and seemed to derive sustenance from the natural magical energies. As a result, they tend to be brownish or sand-colored, and were mostly camouflaged in order to hide from the animals that prey on them. The plants were also able to move to an extent, because their roots seemed to be able to extend to reach the magical ley lines. In a way, they were pretty much some kind of plant-animal blend that didn't need water or sunlight, and instead used sand and magic for its sustenance. The Great Rain is in 15 days. The trio listened to the local humans talk. The sands will flood and we must reach Norgan. Make haste, everyone. They whipped the strange armored beasts, and they roared. The armored beasts were also sand-like creatures similar to the sandbirds and the sandworms. They were fed a collection of brown plant leaves harvested from the various magical plant patches. The locals called them the brown trees. The trio followed the human caravans and reached it in 13. Norgan was the first human settlement they encountered in the world of Shan, and it was located on a rare rock outcropping. A mesa in what appeared to be a sea of sand. The people of Shan made things out of sand and rock, and they did so through a class known as the sand sculptors. We also soon noticed the presence of an altar made of sand that we were pretty sure was a magical object. It granted the class sand sculptor to anyone who prayed to it. All cities have one of these sand altars. They were magical existences, a kind of spiritual object similar to a spiritual tree, but one of sand. It reminded me of Jonpu, and wondered what Jonpu would have done to a world like this. Then we experienced Shazan's unique weather. The Great Flood, a seasonal rain that happens almost like clockwork. The skies were charged with a kind of magic, similar to ley lines, but different. The people of Shan were ready. Their homes, all located on top of the mesas, were built with large walkways, and then it poured. The skies poured more water than we've ever seen anywhere. It was just a constant torrent of rain that flooded everything. The Sea of Sands became an actual sea, complete with monsters and creatures. The sand creatures we saw previously now took new forms, and they shed their body of sand for a body of water. The actual constant rain lasted for 2 weeks, but the Great Flood itself would last for about 2 more months, followed by 2 weeks of the Great Draining. The world alternated between sand and water in about 3-month cycles. During the Great Rain, the Shan humans would fish and harvest the various creatures that spawn in the sea. During the Great Sands, they would hunt certain types of plants and beasts, such as the magically sustained sand plants. Yet, so far, the demons' presence were minimal. There was a demon king here, so it was strange to us. Eventually, my domain holders spent months moving through the vast sands and seas and eventually found it. We soon found the demon king in a flooded pit. It wasn't dead. Water wouldn't kill the creature that didn't need to breathe. Instead, it was headed towards the depths of the core. We also learned there were no surviving heroes. The last of the demon slayers died about 20 years ago. Despite this, the demons did not take over the world. The environment significantly hindered the demons' ability to expand, just as how the oceans of Treehome often constrained the demons to a particular continent. Even when the demons did attack, the demons were also clustered around a few corrupted mesas, islands of demonic forces. The lesser demons didn't take well to water, and the sand creatures were brutal. In some ways, this wasn't a horrible state. The demons hardly bothered the locals. This world didn't really need us. Meteria Hudrot, the stone mage of Magisar. There were only 3 of them, and 3 of these visitors. They were not the strange person she saw, but she trembled. Her senses screamed to take at least a few step backs, so they did. It was the man in armor. Aben. He emitted a keen, cutting presence that made her feel as if her skin and head would be sliced open. Next to him was Lozan, the woman that invited her and spoke to her a few days ago. Then, next to her was another man that felt every bit like a tower master, and more. Greetings. Thank you for coming, Lozan said with a smile. Metaria's brief meetup with her was punctuated by teleportation portals, skills that only tower masters could use. Junker Quartz and Karifa Gunhurt were both master mages and were in the high level 60s. The true masters were in the level 80s, and yet Metaria watched the two of them sweat. Magisarians all had a keen sense of magic and mana, and some Magisarians could even see magic flows in the air around them. Junker Quartz was one of those unique individuals with the power to see magic in the air, and it was why he became a great bronze mage. Lozan led them to a meeting area carved out of the rocks of the ground. The entire area should have been infested with demonic golems, and yet, Metaria's senses were clear. There wasn't any. Karifa sat first, and she naturally took the position as if she was in charge. Who are you three, and what do you want? Lozan smiled. Let's start with what we want. I was told that the Tower Master's position as the Tower Masters can be challenged directly through a magical duel. Karifa, Junker and Metaria stared at each other. Her immediate suspicion was the other towers. During an earlier, much less demon-infested time, Tower Masters frequently sent mages to other towers, and tried to usurp power and claim the other towers by way of a duel. Who do you work for? Which tower? Karifa asked. None of that. Lozan laughed. But can it be done, and is it still recognized today? I doubt it. The Tower Masters won't let go of their positions. Not in our current environment. Karifa frowned, but at that point, a portal opened and a man Karifa and Metaria recognized stepped out. Metaria's fellow disciple. Good to see you again, Master Karifa. Lezen was one of the refugee mages rescued in the Valthorn's recent tour of the Magisarian lands. It's been 8 years. Karifa rubbed her eyes. Have I gone blind? I thought you were dead. It's quite hard for a bug like me to die. The refugee mage was one of the assistants. Well, we had enough of the Tower Master's selfishness. That's a death sentence. Now, we have enough to finally think of challenging the tower's whims. Lezen said proudly. Lozan coughed. Lezen immediately paled and changed his words. My apologies. I certainly wouldn't dare to claim credit for the visitor's achievements. Aben's helmet turned and stared. At that moment, they all felt the man's overwhelming presence on their shoulders. Metaria didn't notice it before, but now that she did, she noticed the man's armor and helmet were not made with their common bronze alloys. Instead, it looked like a metal that's exceptionally rare on Magisar. So much so that Metaria blurted it out. Is that a suit of armor made of steel? Yes, Aben said, and then turned to face Lezen. His voice was heavy and strong, and Lezen cowered in his presence. And you? We invited you to repeat what you said to us. Lezen gulped. I said that it is possible to formally take the position as a Tower Master if a challenger is endorsed by at least 3 resident level 50 mages. Karifa and Junker then looked at each other. Karifa scratched her chin once she recovered from Aben's presence. The old tower's challenge remains within the Gorefort Tower's code, but it has not been invoked in the past 40 or so years. Will the challenger be one of you, Lezen? Your leader? Lezen shook his head. I doubt our leader could even last against the great Tower Masters. Can it be done? Lozan asked. Metaria noticed she was already a little annoyed with the mages' constant diversions. Karifa nodded. Possible. Junker looked at Karifa, and then at the man standing next to Lozan. Will it be you? Metaria's eyes and senses focused on the man with a strange hat, and he shrugged. Much depends on our central command. Lozan frowned. The two of you, can you find someone willing to endorse a foreign mage for the position? The two shook their heads. We won't endorse an outsider. The woman sighed. Well, this has been a waste of time. What level is the Tower Master? They say the few Tower Masters are all level 80 or so. Should we really play their political games just to, formally, claim to rule? Let's just abduct them and haul them back here. The man who was clearly a mage sighed. I bet we can make them see reason with some good old Eons perspective. Aben nodded. We will discuss this further. What is the current formal way to be accepted back into the tower? A written endorsement and sponsorship by a resident mage. Karifa said. Issue 1. Lozan declared. No. Issue 3. Why should we? Lozan then took out a small crystal of tremendous luster. It was soaked in mana, and seemed to shine. Metaria's eyes stared at it greedily, and she noticed her two senior mages making a similar expression. Let's make a deal. Karifa straightened up and her posture changed into one Metairie anew. It was the one when she wanted to do business. Well, I would have preferred if we started off this way. What are we dealing in, and is that thing for trade? Lozan smiled. Why, yes. Metairie stared at the crystal, and realized she couldn't miss out too. Can I be part of the deal, as well? Lozan nodded, and took out two more equally sized crystals. Would you be interested, Junker? The old man's posture transformed in the same manner as Karifa. What do you want us to part with? Lezen looked betrayed. Why wasn't that? Aben stared at him, and he instantly realized he had no place here. The mage flicked a finger, and portal opened. Please leave. This part of the discussion does not involve you. But if you behave and cooperate, there may be other deals we can make with you. Lezen nodded and ran through the portal. Lozan laughed. Metairia's eyes never left the shining crystal of magic. Greed truly was universal. 293. Floodplains. 293. Year 274. Eon. It's been a year since we started exploring the peripheral worlds, and we were now in our 11th world. I began to feel the strain of the expanding world. The Valtrian order now stretched across more worlds, and each of them required resources. Shipment of goods. Even mana. Stella and her growing team of void mages worked overtime to send people over, but ultimately, we had to decide on the placement on the node trees. Without node trees, the void mages would be fully tasked with the movement of people and resources, and this strained our void mages. Our void mages were a fairly limited group in the first place. There were about 2,000 void mages, but most of them were relatively mid-levels around level 60 to 90. Then, there's about 1 to 200 void mages that we considered to be deployable, a decent number, but for movements to these faraway places, it is mainly the void archmages and their peers that did the work. With my domain holders leading the exploration, I directed my own attention on the industry growth. I needed the drain on resources by some of the worlds in repair, such as Tropics World, to taper off. But luckily, it was not bad news. Because for the world of Treehome, the reality bubble expanded, and then, I felt something exceptional happen. In the faraway distance, at the edge of space itself, I could somehow see past the bubble that separated Treehome's reality, and the endless void sea. Using the vision of the void layers granted and shared with me, it was as if there was a world birthed within the void itself. At that moment, I saw thousands of worlds, floating as if suspended in a dormant state. Each world was encased in a package of void energies. The void sea is the spawning pool of the world. It is the primordial soup, and from my point of view, I believe, it was only something I could see. Because through my domain, through my empowerment of Treehome's core, I could see the energy of the core stretch into the void itself, and then, it searched. I didn't know how, or what it did. But it searched through the void sea, as if looking for something that matched. Then it found one, a world somehow with land and water encased in a strange liquid sac within the void sea. I felt the core's authority spread into that liquid sac, and it pulled. It pulled, and pulled. It felt like forever. It felt like just a moment, and the reality bubble of Treehome suddenly bulged as that new world in the sac made contact with the wall. It was as if a larger soap bubble joined with a smaller soap bubble, and then, a new world entered into Treehome's reality. It drifted, then drifted and settled in an outer orbit around Treehome's sun. And so, Treehome now has a sister planet. My forces arrived on the sister planet to find it already populated and with plants and people. A dream from the core of Treehome filled in the blanks. A world that existed entirely within the void sea in a state of limbo. It exists, but imperfectly. The void sea is the cradle of worlds. I strangely found it similar to something from my past life. This new world was as if a program that was in development, but never went live. It ran in a test environment all this while, but when it was pushed to the live environment, it inherited all the history it created during the test environment. The sister world of Treehome, which I now called Shrubhome, shared the same racial mix as Treehome, and it came already present with a decently sized population. How? Most of my forces didn't understand. Or maybe they did, but it was a reality that was hard to swallow. For us from Earth or the source worlds, it was hard to grasp. Whether we were dealing with reality. How was a world that didn't exist before, suddenly exist with its own history in what felt like a few days? In a way, it was simpler to think of this new world as one that exists in a realm separate from ours, and now it moved across the realms to join us. Because the implications of a world created out of scratch meant we were all simulations. That our existence could be created out of the blue by the void sea. The mages were surprisingly more willing to accept it. To them, if summons were real, then creations of a world with its own history could be real. For me personally, I found it easier to think of this sister world as a world that was teleported in, to be our celestial neighbor. Shrubhome was a smaller world. Smaller, but still had seas and continents, similar to Treehome. It had 3 large continents, and my forces arrived to find existing kingdoms and nations already squabbling. There were no domain holders here. Not a single one, and the strongest person we sensed, as only in the level 50s. We spoke to some of the leaders of Shrubhome, and it seems, from their point of view, they were always there, and when they looked up to the skies and the sun, Treehome was always in their star maps. Again, if magic can do so much, creating worlds out of thin air should be doable. But damn, it was hard to truly accept. Somehow, the flow of energies on Shrubhome was also the same as Treehome. This was a world where the core is actually linked to Treehome's core. I sensed the same energy from Shrubhome's core. The core was a physical object, but in Treehome's case, now it was split into 2. I wondered whether this was a form of defense mechanism. A demon king needed to capture both cores in order to fully control the world. 11th World. Shan, land of sands and floods. Demons are gigantic fire demons but expansion curtailed by the sands. Sand. Johann picked up a handful of sand, and the sand was blown away by the wind. It was fine sand, high quality, even. But sand. The sun was bright, and there was not a single cloud in the sky. The sand, the heat, the cloudless sky all reminded them of the scorpionoid lands of Jonpu. Well, looks like we found the world to fulfill our promise to Jonpu. Rune smiled. Kefri would enjoy this place. Is something going on with you and Kefri? Izar asked. Rune shook his head. Nothing. There was nothing, and there's still nothing. At one point, Chung was pursuing her. He's dying soon. You have a chance. Rune made an exaggerated retching expression. Please. At some point I'm going to prefer to be partnerless. I have a partner. Izar admitted. And she's cute. I hope to have many babies with her. Rune paused as he looked into the distance. There was a very faint scent of some kind of human presence. I didn't know that. Is it a fairly recent thing? Izar nodded. Yeah, we got together recently. At least, before this whole peripheral worlds thing. I kinda miss her already. The ranger pointed in a direction, and the 3 began to move. Well, maybe you should head back and go make some babies. I think there's really no need for 3 of us in a single world. Izar shrugged. The 3 of us are meant to offset Lumuf and Edna's significantly higher levels. But yeah, I should make babies. I know. Rune laughed. But yeah, look, humans. Again. That's good. Johann joined in and the 3 activated their illusionary spells. They needed to stalk the natives and learn more about them before making the first contact. Eon would love to have a look at your kids. Izar nodded. Eon's medical care would be indispensable. I mean, I know what you mean. Izar said. I'm curious too. I just hope there's no complications for the mother. Is she human? Where's she from? Rune asked. Yeah, she's an enchanter working for the Valthorns. She helped make one of the pieces of my gauntlets. Oh, sweet. At least she isn't an outsider. That hardly works well, Rune said. There's Valthorns married to folks outside the order, and that can get a little messy if things get leaked. Izar squirmed. What usually happens is the outsider gets absorbed in, but that can be a little traumatic for the partner. Rune explained. There were information access tiers to the order, and for domain holders, they pretty much had full access. As one goes down the order's ranks, the access tiers decreased. It's monitored by the artificial minds, to ensure key information remains secure. There wasn't 100% security. Not with the various kinds of espionage skills and surveillance spells, but we have been fairly successful in controlling data leakages with a huge network of artificial minds and Patrick's perpetual mind scanning abilities. You need to tell me more. Later, Izar said as the 3 snuck close and followed the human caravan traveling through the sands. The trio didn't take long to start noticing the unusual creatures of this desert world. 1. There were sandbirds. They were part sand, part spiritual creatures that were more like elementals than actual animals. There were many other larger creatures, like a gigantic sandfish that resembled a transparent fish but with sand as its skin. They were just native animals made of sand. Then, the vegetation was also different. Despite the strong sunlight, the plants they have were skinny, brown-colored things. Instead, these plants were drawn to magic, and seemed to derive sustenance from the natural magical energies. As a result, they tend to be brownish or sand-colored, and were mostly camouflaged in order to hide from the animals that prey on them. The plants were also able to move to an extent, because their roots seemed to be able to extend to reach the magical ley lines. In a way, they were pretty much some kind of plant-animal blend that didn't need water or sunlight, and instead used sand and magic for its sustenance. The great rain is in 15 days. The trio listened to the local humans talk. The sands will flood and we must reach Norgan. Make haste, everyone. They whipped the strange armored beasts, and they roared. The armored beasts were also sand-like creatures similar to the sandbirds and the sandworms. They were fed a collection of brown plant leaves harvested from the various magical plant patches. The locals called them the brown trees. The trio followed the human caravans and reached it in 13. Norgan was the first human settlement they encountered in the world of Shan, and it was located on a rare rock outcropping. A mesa in what appeared to be a sea of sand. The people of Shan made things out of sand and rock, and they did so through a class known as the sand sculptors. We also soon noticed the presence of an altar made of sand that we were pretty sure was a magical object. It granted the class sand sculptor to anyone who prayed to it. All cities have one of these sand altars. They were magical existences, a kind of spiritual object similar to a spiritual tree, but one of sand. It reminded me of Jonpu, and wondered what Jonpu would have done to a world like this. Then we experienced Shazan's unique weather. The Great Flood. A seasonal rain that happens almost like clockwork. The skies were charged with a kind of magic, similar to ley lines, but different. The people of Shan were ready. Their homes, all located on top of the mesas, were built with large walkways, and then it poured. The skies poured. More water than we've ever seen anywhere. It was just a constant torrent of rain that flooded everything. The sea of sands became an actual sea, complete with monsters and creatures. The sand creatures we saw previously now took new forms, and they shed their body of sand for a body of water. The actual constant rain lasted for 2 weeks, but the Great Flood itself would last for about 2 more months, followed by 2 weeks of the Great Draining. The world alternated between sand and water in about 3-month cycles. During the Great Rain, the Shan humans would fish and harvest the various creatures that spawn in the sea. During the Great Sands, they would hunt certain types of plants and beasts, such as the magically sustained sand plants. Yet, so far, the demons' presence were minimal. There was a demon king here, so it was strange to us. Eventually, my domain holders spent months moving through the vast sands and seas and eventually found it. We soon found the demon king in a flooded pit. It wasn't dead. Water wouldn't kill the creature that didn't need to breathe. Instead, it was headed towards the depths of the core. We also learned there were no surviving heroes. The last of the demon slayers died about 20 years ago. Despite this, the demons did not take over the world. The environment significantly hindered the demons' ability to expand, just as how the oceans of Treehome often constrained the demons to a particular continent. Even when the demons did attack, the demons were also clustered around a few corrupted mesas, islands of demonic forces. The lesser demons didn't take well to water, and the sand creatures were brutal. In some ways, this wasn't a horrible state. The demons hardly bothered the locals. This world didn't really need us. Meteria Hudrot, the stone mage of Magisar. There were only 3 of them, and 3 of these visitors. They were not the strange person she saw, but she trembled. Her senses screamed to take at least a few step backs, so they did. It was the man in armor. Aben. He emitted a keen, cutting presence that made her feel as if her skin and head would be sliced open. Next to him was Lozan, the woman that invited her and spoke to her a few days ago. Then, next to her was another man that felt every bit like a tower master, and more. Greetings. Thank you for coming, Lozan said with a smile. Meteria's brief meetup with her was punctuated by teleportation portals, skills that only tower masters could use. Junker Quartz and Karifa Gunhurt were both master mages and were in the high level 60s. The true masters were in the level 80s, and yet Meteria watched the 2 of them sweat. Magisarians all had a keen sense of magic and mana, and some Magisarians could even see magic flows in the air around them. Junker Quartz was one of those unique individuals with the power to see magic in the air, and it was why he became a great bronze mage. Lozan led them to a meeting area carved out of the rocks of the ground. The entire area should have been infested with demonic golems, and yet, Meteria's senses were clear. There wasn't any. Karifa sat first, and she naturally took the position as if she was in charge. Who are you 3, and what do you want? Lozan smiled. Let's start with what we want. I was told that the Tower Master's position as the Tower Masters can be challenged directly through a magical duel. Karifa, Junker and Meteria stared at each other. Her immediate suspicion was the other towers. During an earlier, much less demon-infested time, Tower Masters frequently sent mages to other towers, and tried to usurp power and claim the other towers by way of a duel. Who do you work for? Which tower? Karifa asked. None of that. Lozan laughed. But can it be done, and is it still recognized today? I doubt it. The Tower Masters won't let go of their positions. Not in our current environment. Karifa frowned, but at that point, a portal opened and a man Karifa and Meteria recognized stepped out. Meteria's fellow disciple. Good to see you again, Master Karifa. Lezen was one of the refugee mages rescued in the Valthorn's recent tour of the Magisarian lands. It's been 8 years. Karifa rubbed her eyes. Have I gone blind? I thought you were dead. It's quite hard for a bug like me to die. The refugee mage was one of the assistants. Well, we had enough of the Tower Master's selfishness. That's a death sentence. Now, we have enough to finally think of challenging the tower's whims. Lezen said proudly. Lozan coughed. Lezen immediately paled and changed his words. My apologies. I certainly wouldn't dare to claim credit for the visitor's achievements. Aben's helmet turned and stared. At that moment, they all felt the man's overwhelming presence on their shoulders. Meteria didn't notice it before, but now that she did, she noticed the man's armor and helmet were not made with their common bronze alloys. Instead, it looked like a metal that's exceptionally rare on Magisar. So much so that Meteria blurted it out. Is that a suit of armor made of steel? Yes, Aben said, and then turned to face Lezen. His voice was heavy and strong, and Lezen cowered in his presence. And you? We invited you to repeat what you said to us. Lezen gulped. I said that it is possible to formally take the position as a Tower Master if a challenger is endorsed by at least 3 resident level 50 mages. Karifa and Junker then looked at each other. Karifa scratched her chin once she recovered from Aben's presence. The old tower's challenge remains within the Gorefort Tower's code, but it has not been invoked in the past 40 or so years. Will the challenger be one of you, Lezen? Your leader? Lezen shook his head. I doubt our leader could even last against the great Tower Masters. Can it be done? Lozan asked. Meteria noticed she was already a little annoyed with the mages' constant diversions. Karifa nodded. Possible. Junker looked at Karifa, and then at the man standing next to Lozan. Will it be you? Meteria's eyes and senses focused on the man with a strange hat, and he shrugged. Much depends on our central command. Lozan frowned. The two of you, can you find someone willing to endorse a foreign mage for the position? The two shook their heads. We won't endorse an outsider. The woman sighed. Well, this has been a waste of time. What level is the Tower Master? They say the few Tower Masters are all level 80 or so. Should we really play their political games just to, formally, claim to rule? Let's just abduct them and haul them back here. The man who was clearly a mage sighed. I bet we can make them see reason with some good old Eons perspective. Aben nodded. We will discuss this further. What is the current formal way to be accepted back into the tower? A written endorsement and sponsorship by a resident mage. Karifa said. Issue 1. Lozan declared. No. Issue 3. Why should we? Lozan then took out a small crystal of tremendous luster. It was soaked in mana, and seemed to shine. Meteria's eyes stared at it greedily, and she noticed her 2 senior mages making a similar expression. Let's make a deal. Karifa straightened up and her posture changed into one Meteria knew. It was the one when she wanted to do business. Well, I would have preferred if we started off this way. What are we dealing in, and is that thing for trade? Lozan smiled. Why, yes. Meteria stared at the crystal, and realized she couldn't miss out too. Can I be part of the deal, as well? Lozan nodded, and took out 2 more equally sized crystals. Would you be interested, Junker? The old man's posture transformed in the same manner as Karifa. What do you want us to part with? Lezen looked betrayed. Why wasn't that? Aben stared at him, and he instantly realized he had no place here. The mage flicked a finger, and portal opened. Please leave. This part of the discussion does not involve you. But if you behave and cooperate, there may be other deals we can make with you. Lezen nodded and ran through the portal. Lozan laughed. Meteria's eyes never left the shining crystal of magic. Greed truly was universal. 294. Floodplains 2. Year 274, Part 2. There were still a few more worlds to explore, but back home, I tried to consider my options with the 11 worlds we have visited so far. I decided it was a good idea to pool all my domain holders and get some preliminary assessments. It's likely that the 4 worlds wouldn't be too far off. A group back home started to work on our expected response to the demons. Some of these worlds were in a stable state. It made me wonder, of course. Despite the peripheral world's distance to the Demon King, not all of them have folded. So, why? I've been thinking about the nature of the peripheral worlds, and concluded that the peripheral worlds usually have some kind of defensibility. It is this defensibility that makes them into contested zones. Worlds that are hard for the demons to fully capture. Worlds that are also hard for the gods to properly reinforce. In short, peripheral worlds are not peripheral worlds by distance, even if it was one of the factors, but by sheer survivorship bias. Faraway worlds that cannot be defended, and lacked inherent defensibility meant they would easily fold to the demons. That meant they were not the gods' problem anymore, since they are then demon worlds. Worlds that are close to the gods can be easily defended and reinforced, so they remain as normal worlds. So, peripheral worlds are those that are in limbo. Worlds that are hard for the demons to conquer due to their design, and those that the gods find it hard to reinforce. If these two were true, it was likely that these sorts of worlds would become peripheral worlds, because they would survive the drift. Could it just be a fluke that the hero's old artifacts and items give the natives some fighting chance to hang on? Lumoof countered. Of course. But it's just something I've been thinking about. It was just a hypothesis that peripheral worlds become battlegrounds because they experience longer periods of struggle against the demons. Worlds that can't put up a fight die, or fall to the demons, and thus drift out of the gods' influence anyway. Lava World. How do you feel? Kefri said as Samuel, our Samahiro the elf hero, gained levels battling the demons of Lava World. Better. Stronger. Samuel said while he rested. He gained a level that day. The demon champion was hardly a threat. With more power, they would have the ability to retake Landis from the Demon King. The goal was to get Samuel at least into the level 100s, one they achieved fairly easily. But each new hero had their own style of battle, and K, as the new hero manager, decided that all the heroes needed to have practice sessions. It was something copied from the Valthorns, since the Valthorns had battle simulations in order to form their battle tactics. The heroes, even with their natural gifts, still needed practice. Samuel also needed to get used to his new abilities, even if the divine gifts of the hero class helped tremendously. But the demon champions were too weak to be a challenge. Without really pushing it, it was hard for the heroes to really know how well they worked together. Teamwork was one of the few things that the hero class wasn't very good at. It is good to have another close combat fighter in our team. Adrian said. Colette, Prabhu, Adrian, Kefri. 4 heroes. And now they were 5 once more. I'm just happy there's more of us. Prabhu sighed. I hope they find more heroes on the other worlds. Samuel looked around. It was better than being alone, for sure. I hope so too. The Valthorns concluded it was best to decide which world to clear out its Demon King, only after we've explored all 15 worlds. In some states it's likely there were stable worlds. So for now, Samuel and the other heroes prepared for war. They repaired old hero items, restored magical defenses. 12th. Gigant Dragon. The planetary dragon. Stella and Lumoof opened the portal and instantly knew this was one of those unusual worlds. A world that existed on the surface of a gigantic planetary dragon, that's forever chasing a sun. The world was constantly moving. It wasn't moving in the void sea, but after staring at the edge of its reality bubble for a moment, we concluded it was likely to only appear as if it was always moving. Maybe it was like a marble spinning in place as water flowed around it. Well, a giant dragon. Lumoof looked around. They landed on what appeared to be the middle part of the dragon's body. The part that looked like the head was the brightest, and yet, even on the surface of this gigantic planetary dragon's body, there was running water, plants, trees, and mountains. That's a first. I wonder whether Eons' clone could link to the dragon's will, then we could possibly gain control, or communicate with it. You're concluding that a planetary-sized world's core is a sentient dragon? Yes, I suppose. Stella said. A creature of this size. I think we have to let go of some of our assumptions. It may only possess the physical form of a dragon, but nothing actually requires it to be sentient. Its movements, its mannerisms may just be a set of instructions imprinted to its being. A machine. Stella sighed, as she scanned around. I suppose in a world of magic, nothing really requires planets to be, well, planets. Lumoof nodded, and through him, our senses expanded. I could feel it, and they could too. Heroes. There were still heroes here. And at the same time, we also felt the presence of a demon king. A strong one. We knew because its demonic energies were intense, as if amplified by the natural energies of the land itself. That's not good, Stella said, as her hands got to work. A portal world opened, the two stepped through and found a battlefield with strong demons. Demons that glowed with lines of magic, and they were strong. Champions littered the skies as if they didn't cost energy. Because they didn't. Stella's magical senses expanded, as she sent magical probes all around. But here, around the waist of the planet-sized dragon, was a battleground between the land controlled by the demons, and the lands controlled by the natives. Two heroes, two humans with magical wings, surrounded by smaller drakes, fought back against the demons. They were strong, but the demon king, a giant two-headed armored lizard, breathed magic glowed with the same strange lines. I'm not totally certain, but it seems this demon king left parts of itself on ley lines and that ley line energy fed the demon king. Stella said as she landed behind Lumuf. It seemed like the demon king was going to fire a weapon their way as well. One of the heads opened fire, and a magical blast smashed into Lumuf's shields. It burned through 3 layers of shields, but didn't reach Lumuf. It did make him sweat a little, and so he prepared to activate his shields again. Well, that's something. The other head of the demon king fired, and the heroes dodged the energy blast. It was considerably more powerful than the average demon king, and its energies were a blend of demonic energy and the unusual ley lines energies. They couldn't take the hit directly. Think we should help them? Lumuf looked at Stella, but that question was partly directed at me. I could feel Lumuf's presence. The demon king charged at the heroes at a surreal speed, and the two heroes countered with attacks of their own. They were fairly powerful, and their own energy attacks left large scars on the demon king, but those wounds regenerated quickly, its health supported by the ley lines. Stella could feel the demon king's energies were linked to other places. There were fragments of the demon king spread throughout the tail of this planetary-sized dragon. We should help to destroy those ley line sources, if we want that to happen. But we couldn't do that. The demon king closed in on the heroes, and fired an energy blast at point blank. A shot that would have killed the heroes. Lumuf seemingly blinked in front of the two humanoid heroes, and created a massive wooden shield and blocked the attack from the demon king. The blast tore through layers of wooden shields, and the shockwave of the attack sent Lumuf and the two heroes backward. I could feel the two heroes were tired, and had not much strength to continue this fight. Let's rescue the heroes and we can talk strategy later. Taking out the demon's fragments on the ley lines should be quite easy. Stella nodded. You'll have to carry them out. My void portals won't work with the heroes. Lumuf approached the two humanoid heroes. They were battered. They didn't have much wounds on them, but they spent quite a lot of their energy on the demon king. Hello, heroes. I think this battle is lost. Let us retreat and we can discuss details later. The two looked at each other, and back at Lumuf. Sure. The demon king didn't give chase, while we followed the heroes away from the battlefield and arrived at a dragonling city, filled with flying drakes and the humanoid dragonlings. It was a border town, one closest to the creeping demonic corruption, and the home base of the two heroes, for now. They've been trying to push back against the demon king for a while, but with just the two of them, they've not been able to overwhelm the demon king. I'm Lumuf, and this is my friend, Stella. The two heroes, Raja and Weera, were summoned about a year ago. But the demon king and the demons arrived about 6 years before that, and so they got a 5 years head start. The demon king advances slowly. The two heroes explained. Each time it creeps forward, it tries to capture the ley lines within the ground, and it goes stronger with each captured magical ley line. The two of us couldn't really beat it, even though we gained levels after each battle. It almost seems as if we're fighting against a monster we can't win. Each time we hurt it, it just regenerates. Demon kings have exceptional regeneration ability. Stella said. What you experienced isn't unusual. Does it have minions? I didn't see any lesser demons beyond the usual hellhounds and critters. A few. They're not that weak, though. The heroes said. Why didn't you sneak past it and attack the ley lines? It wouldn't let us. Raja countered. You know how this world is like one long dragon. Any time we try to get past that line it knows we are coming. It can tell we are headed there. Ah, the demons have hero vision. So for the heroes, they would not be able to sneak past the demon king. Stella looked at Lumuf. But we could. The two heroes looked at each other. Yes. Yes, you totally can. Teleportation? Lumuf asked. Jammed. Raja added. The Demon King's energies spread throughout the demon lands and any teleportation spell into that area gets shredded. We can't maintain a stable portal. But what defenses do they have? Mostly the demon lords. Raja added. Demon lords? Lumuf asked. Demons empowered by the ley lines. They are quite powerful, but nothing like the Demon King. We could take one down, but the ley lines are all protected by these demon lords. Ah. Demon champions. Just terminology differences. Lumuf breathed a sigh of relief. At least it wasn't an unusual class of demon, most likely just a demon champion that has a similar energy absorption mechanism as its parent Demon King. This Demon King seemed to rely on capturing ley lines to make itself stronger, and also spawn more powerful demons. So, actually, we kinda got ahead of ourselves by diving right into the demon problem. What is this world? Lumuf said. The dragonlings of this world, Giganta, looked at us with interest, but ultimately left us alone. The heroes were more than happy to explain it to us. The world of Gigant Dragon is a long dragon-shaped planet that is perpetually chasing the golden sun. The day-night cycle is determined by the position of the dragon's head, and the long shadow the head casts over the rest of its body as it moves through in a rotational pattern through space, blocking out the sun. It twirls and moves, as the stars around the world warped and shifted, as if it is forever chasing the sun, but we knew this was an illusion. Nothing was moving. The land itself is separated into 15 large segments, each representing like a chunk or segment of the body, as if the body of the dragon is some sort of gigantic centipede of stone and earth, and on those segments are rather normal features such as mountains, seas, lakes, farmlands and so on. Between the segments is a part called the dragon's skin, essentially an unstable part of the land that frequently experiences fissures due to how two linked segments of the planet-sized dragon moves about as it rotates around the sun. The tail end is significantly colder than the parts closer to the head, where it is warmer. The magical energies of the ley lines are also stronger closer to the dragon's head, but there are ley lines throughout Giganta's body. The locals refer to the ley lines as the dragon's veins, because they were the energies of the gigantic dragon. It is inhabited by a mixture of dragonlings, drakes, and humanoids, and the dragonlings worship a mix of Hawa and Gaia. The dragonlings and drakes have elemental biases that were reflected in their skin. The green-shaded dragonlings and drakes generally had powers of the wood and earth, the reddish, orange dragonlings were fire, and the blue-white dragonlings and drakes were of the water, ice and wind elements. These three were the main subgroups of dragonlings, and the fire element dragonlings were clustered closer to the head of Giganta and the areas where there were volcanoes and rivers of lava, while the water and earth element dragonlings were more spread out. Raja and Weera, as heroes, were the union of the three dragonling subgroups, and they had powers of all three dragonlings, and could empower their drakes. The drakes of Capra or Johan's dragon would be fascinating to introduce to the dragonlings of this world, and vice versa, but that would be a later problem. For now, it is the heroes that would do the moving. So, when are you two going to sneak past the gates? Are you two like world travelers? Like some hero that finished their quest and now could travel from world to world? Stella shook her head. Nothing like that. We're not even heroes, but let's say we have an organization behind us. I don't see it. Is it like some kind of starship flying overhead? Raja and Weera looked overhead. The sky was somehow filled with stars, even if it's not a real thing, and the stars looked like they moved in a particular direction. No. I suppose if we deploy a node here, we can introduce you to the rest of us. Wait. What about defenses? We'll have to hold the Demon King back. If it senses us disappearing, it may decide to attack. Or what stands between the Demon King and total annihilation of the dragonlings? That doesn't always happen. Lumuf countered. It doesn't. No. We can't desert our post here. Not even for a bit. The two heroes said with certainty. Their reaction made Lumuf pause for a while, before he said. I see. Then we need to discuss our plans before we go ahead. The two domain holders left the heroes to their own affairs. What did you think? Stella and Lumuf met somewhere away from the heroes. Their hero class compulsions seem a little strong there. They are fairly high level, that sort of meddling is expected. Lumuf frowned. We wouldn't be able to move them, and we'll have to bring the rest of the heroes here. Stella merely nodded, and waited for Lumuf to continue. Or we do what's sensible. We sneak past the demons' battle lines and hit the ley lines. That would ensure that the heroes can survive the next conflict with the Demon King. Then we bring the heroes. If we leave as it is, it's likely they won't survive an encounter with the Demon King. I think we should call for some reinforcement, give them some breathing room then decide later. The Void Domain holder nodded. Yeah, that's probably our best choice. We should figure out what's up with this Demon King anyway. 295. Interlude. Peripheral consequences. 295 Interlude. The Eonic Landis era. Landis. Commander Argo looked and noticed unusual expressions in his fellow elves. They didn't have the old expressions of exhaustion, or anger, or joy. Stress. His fellow elves struggled to keep up with the demands of their new rulers. Fortifications were constructed at breakneck pace, the old farms rebuilt so quickly. The visitors. The divine guides. Argo, in his heart, thought of them as the messengers of heaven. It was hard. His people were so used to subsistence. So used to existing scraping by, that the messengers of the tree god had to teach and reintroduce many new skills. Even the art of building better homes, or processing tools, or recording information. Landis lost so much of its old administrative abilities and knowledge. But, the change brought by the messengers had been swift, so swift that his people, now no longer existing under the threat of the demons, struggled to adapt. Stress. They were all listening to the centaur, talking about recording information, city design, and city administration. Things they never thought about. It didn't matter when things could get destroyed. But now, they had to design for permanence. They had to rebuild their military ability, and they were all, truly, stressed. The old elven soldiers were now trained by the messengers. They were veterans of war. Many of them were old too, and survivors of many demonic attacks. But they survived without regimented training. They gained their levels, often learning from the older soldiers, and from each other. Their methods and styles all contained habits that didn't always work. Now the Valthorns came, and truly, they were a thorn in their backside. Yet it was not defiance. His people were not defiant. They knew how different the power level were. Every single messenger Argo met was level 100 and more. They were stronger, their equipment and tactics were well honed. In some ways, they were truly anti-demonic specialists, and they wanted to train them to be like them. The Valthorn Lord present came with a small army of expertly built golems. A golem master, of some sort, and somehow, the laborers worked to rebuild the city. Nunarnisk must be rebuilt quickly and better. The man said. And unfortunately, many of you lost the skills to do it. We will have to bridge the gap. But first, we need all the old designs out of your old archives. Nunarnisk was an ancient city, and the druids' magical roots pierced the ground and revealed many such old structures hidden after centuries of war. Many of them were hidden under debris, and over time, forgotten. Their people were too busy surviving war after war that the brief periods of peace didn't grant them much respite to even think of archaeology. Stress. The elders squinted and cracked their heads trying to decipher text from the old days that they struggled. Some of them were written in Old White Elven that none of them truly could say they still understood. Even though the system naturally bridged the speaking language, and often granted knowledge of the current lingua franca, the written system drifted over the centuries, and that drift meant old text started to lose legibility after sufficient amount of drift. But the messengers insisted that they dig anyway. The messengers were not all warriors. Some were clearly mage scholars, fascinated to pore over new text and subjects never before seen by their kind. Commander Argo was nearby when he saw a group of them discuss. They spoke fairly audibly that Argo heard them loud and clear. Our goals for the excavation are to locate old maps and find old spells. From those old maps, we then locate places of magical study. If we are lucky, we may be able to learn new spells that were previously unique to the White Elves. We will have to leave the originals here with the White Elves as per our caretaking agreement, but what we learn, we take and add to our library of spells. We will also extend our coverage outside of Nunarnisk, if there are any strong leads. Understood. The rest of them nodded. Old spells. Argo wondered to himself what old spells did the White Elves know. A part of him wondered whether he should consider it sacred and sacrilegious to let these newcomers go through their history. But the locals had no strength to resist them. Nunarnisk and the many capitals were all home to great elven mages during the pre-demonic age. Though the messengers clearly came to help, it seemed that they also had ulterior motives of their own. Roskor was a hive of activity, as new areas for housing were built seemingly overnight. Gigantic trees turned into homes littered the outer ring of Roskor's original fort, all meant to house the tens of thousands of refugees that now called Roskor home. Refugees. How much food do we have? Do we have enough to feed everyone? Novorosk stared at crowds waiting outside their newly constructed canteens. Yes, yes. One of the blood elves nodded with a bit of frustration. Warleader, don't worry about us. Food will take some time, but there is enough. Enough. Sure. It was so strange that the word, enough, still seemed weird to him. It was hard to change from a mindset of scarcity. For some, it was easier. For Novorosk, it was hard. He didn't know what to say. He felt a little lost. The refugees all came to collect and eat food. The Valthorn druids blessed their farms and spawned new fruit trees. There were many new farms, and with more new produce there should be enough for everyone to keep their hunger away. It wouldn't be enough for luxury. Not yet. The druids and builders that came to Roskor focused on the staple foods, and together with the refugees, constructed new farms and plantations that would feed them all. It was enough to feed twice their current population, but the variety was still almost non-existent. They would have to develop more farms with more interesting food varieties in the future. Novorosk watched, and wondered what he'll miss in Roskor if he blinked. I've summoned everyone here to discuss a key topic for the future of Landis. Druid Fallon of the Valthorns stated, as a treefolk man appeared. They've never seen a man made out of a tree, and wondered whether he was some kind of mythical creature written in their ancient text. This is Lord Kravake, a senior noble lord from our world. He is visiting temporarily to assist with the economic aspects of Landis. There were old elves from every surviving city of Landis. Many of the surviving towns quickly consolidated, as most were barely surviving and eager to rejoin a larger society. In time, some will wander out again, but for now, the centuries of war left most elves eager to reconnect with their fellow elves. Coinage was lost from your old era. Kravake declared after what appeared to be weeks and months of pouring through ancient text with a small army of assistants and translators. Most cities and Landasian settlements now function without coinage, everything through a pooled set of resources allocated by the elders. This is familiar to all of you, but that was not how things were in the old era, and your current favors and allocation system will not work once you become proper nation states. What followed was Kravake's highly summarized brief on the economic history of the old Elven Empire era. On behalf of the Valthorns, we intend to restore the coinage system, and for now, we hope that all the different elves adopt a single coin system until your world regains sufficient scale and industrial output. We will then use this coinage to trade with your cities for the resources each of your cities will then produce. The elders glanced at each other. They would have to produce something to trade with each other, because the Valthorn force concentrated on defenses and basic needs. The Valthorn's expansion also quickly flagged many potential resource sites, some containing the usual metals, some containing magical resources such as crystals and gems. There were some rather basic questions from the elders. They asked why trade was needed when each of them were currently self-sufficient. Two main reasons: quality and levels. Specialization allows the creation of higher-tier goods, which improves quality. It also raises levels, which allow for an individual to create even better tools and equipment. Trade is necessary to allow each individual to have sufficient production volume. With sufficient production volume, the system recognizes their specialization and awards levels. Trade creates volume, volume creates improvements and experience, and the maker then gains levels. This is how our world's industrial base gained power. We hope to replicate it to yours. Kravik naturally omitted the part where this was only applicable to the lower level 100s, because the level gains from non-combat activities quickly plateau past level 70 to 90, depending on the type of non-combat class. They weren't there yet, not with their current subsistence level industry. It would take a decade or two to restore some decent level of trade. It was as much a mindset and habit issue than just knowing the means. Warleader Novorosk, please, show me the old shield structures. The hero Samahiro or Samuel finally visited their home. He was healthy, handsome as hell, and all the elven females watched him walk by. Novorosk nodded, pleased to be useful. Novorosk hardly recognized Roskor now, with all the new structures added and old structures cleaned up. How are things? Samuel asked. The last time I saw you was on Treehome. My apologies for not visiting sooner. I had to gain some levels. It is nothing. It's not like the shields were used at all. Novorosk said. Samuel nodded, as they finally reached the shield structure. There used to be at least 3 to 4 mages here, all feeding their magical energies to support the shield structure. It was an ornate, historical object, made with a blend of metals and crystals, and left by a hero many, many centuries ago. It was once their lifeline, and Novorosk swore to protect it with his life. Little did he expect to ever see a day that here it stood, unattended, unprotected. He sighed. If this era lasts, this thing will no longer be needed. Samuel shook his head, as he touched it. His star mana pool was larger now, much, much larger than it originally was. He easily fed his star mana to the thirsty object, and the two felt the energies of the shield regain strength. The wider world is an unforgiving place. Very unforgiving place. It is. Novorosk said. How many such structures have you fixed? A lot. I lost count. I was told to create new ones, just in case. Samuel sat. So, will you keep me company, warleader? Novorosk nodded. There is nothing much for a warleader like me to do, other than train and spar with my fellow soldiers. For a moment, the two sat in peace. You should join them. Samuel spoke after working for a bit, and a magical ball emerged before him. Samuel's Hero Forge would create an additional set of defensive equipment, complete with instructions of use. Most defensive equipment also had a passive charging ability, but often the ambient energies are so thin that they take a while to charge. Novorosk looked out of a small door. It was normally closed, but these days, there was no risk. The view was of a Roskor that was changing. A warrior would have no place in a time of peace. I want to. Novorosk said. Samuel nodded. You worry for your team. Novorosk wanted to say no, but then nodded. Yes. I still wonder whether my place is here or there. Or whether I should even. You should join the Valthorns. I've seen what they want to do, and they still need more soldiers. They need far more than you can fathom. Why? Samuel looked up. There was a ceiling on top. There were fading paintings made by the old white elves from an older time. There are thousands of worlds out there, many of them like ours, struggling to hold on. They all need help. You received help, Warleader Novorosk. It is time to do your part, and help those who are in need. Novorosk looked at Samuel. He heard of the same briefing, and understood what it meant. I know. I just need some time to tell my team. They will understand, just as how the rest of the heroes understood I needed time. I, too, was not ready to face the Demon King again. The two exchanged glances, and Novorosk understood that Samuel was still afraid of the Demon King. The Demon King cursed him in their first confrontation, and even though he successfully fled, the curse deteriorated and left him in a near comatose state, with the cherry spirit tree trying its best to keep him alive. The warleader sighed. To the hero must think his own fears as just something small. I will. Good. I'm done. I will have to speak to the mages. Can you call them? Samuel took out a crystal spherical object that quickly made itself at home. Novorosk felt its magical energies spread out, and another magical protective layer emerged over their fortress. It wouldn't be enough to cover all of Roskor. Not with all the new settlements outside its old walls. But it was just an additional layer of security. An insurance. I'll call them in, Hiro Samahiro. Please wait. Good. I hope the next time I see you, it's when you are in a different set of uniforms. Novorosk chuckled at how quickly the elven heroes switched allegiances. But he was right. The world is much bigger than he thought. He'd speak to the druid Fallon later, and see whether he could be a new member of the Valthorns. I've been wondering when you would ask. Druid Fallon had a schedule where he visited each of the different elven cities. There were only about 30 large surviving elven cities, and Roskor was one of them. You know, you're not the first, Warleader Novorosk. The Valthorns are already vetting those who wish to join. How many asked? About 100 for now. We expect more to join, eventually. Fallon patted Novorosk on the shoulder. I can't give you any special benefits, but you'll have to join the training system. Once you're sufficiently trained, you will be sent to where Eons sees fit. Novorosk shuddered. I see. Many will fail. Being around Eon is a difficult thing, and minds need to be made of sterner stuff. Novorosk remembered the sensation of having his mind assaulted. It was something that still lingered until today. But many of you are warriors who lived a life of protecting your homes. If you do it for the right reasons, and so, I think you will find it easier. Fallon said. I do. Those that put themselves out there must be willing to burn a bit of themselves. The druid said. Novorosk didn't understand. Why? Fallon smiled. Because you will be digging deeper into yourself, all the time. You will try to be more, do more. We burn a little bit of ourselves so that together, we shine brighter. Novorosk thought that sounded familiar. It was a sensation he remembered. He nodded. I look forward to it. Fallon tapped him on the shoulder again. I hope to see you soon, Warleader Novorosk. Be prepared for transport. 296. Braided branches. 296. Treehome. It is damned good to be back. Kaffa was happy to be back in Freshka. He took a shower, followed by a long dip in a slimy tub filled with fragrances that most humans would find appalling. But lizard folks enjoyed certain types of scents, scents that reminded them of the village, or city they came from. The rivers they played in. Non-lizard folks visiting their homes often have to use some scent nullification artifact, to mitigate the nausea it tends to create. It was time to hit Gigant Dragon soon, and Johan's party also took a short break. The domain holders decided it was a good idea to meet up to discuss strategy and tactics. Well, I think given its stronger magical nature, it should be somewhat vulnerable to anti-magical attacks. At least, the stronger anti-magical weapons could disrupt the ley lines enough to temporarily weaken the Demon King. We could test it out, Edna said. They would have to draw up a revised list of equipment and inventory for the coming battle. But taking that many anti-magic weapons will drain our store. We've been using them a lot. Izar noted. Production's not keeping up. Kaffa shook his head, and sipped his drink. Why not? Access to that world is seasonal. We don't have a clone or a node on it. Johan quickly looked up some reports. I think we should put a node there, at least. The 5 domain holders looked at each other. Yeah, let's do that. Rune frowned, and then looked at Kaffa. I think our thinking about these sets of worlds need to be adjusted. I think the anti-magic sand worlds needs to be turned into one of our core worlds. It has no population. If the entire idea is to strip mine that world for the anti-magic sands, a node tree will be sufficient. Kaffa countered. I'd rather put a clone on this dragon world. Or that heavily populated world. Does Eon want to place a clone on this dragon world? Johan asked. We seem to be encountering a streak of dragon-type worlds. That's good for you, isn't it? Kaffa countered cheerfully, in a much better mood. He had a glass of his favorite juice. In some convoluted way, not really. My dragon seems easily jealous, and I'm not exactly sure how it'll react to it. There should be some kind of group benefit from controlling all the Dragon Drake worlds together. Edna countered. The Drake fruits of Capra could be used to help the Drakes of Gigant Dragon. This mutual assistance could result in a powerful force. Does he want the Dragonlings? Kaffa shrugged. I think all the differences between the world and their special qualities is just a distraction. I think it's all a little silly in the end. Why? That made Rune and Johan turned. In the end, there's only 3 things that really matter, at least when we try to fit them in the way we work. Domain holders, crystals, and the craftsmen that produce the equipment and items to support us. Worlds that can create domain holders, worlds that help produce crystals so we can blow the demons up, and the worlds that can create all the craftsmen we need, so that we can turn resources into weapons. That relies on the assumption that our bombs continue to work on Demon Kings. There will be Demon Kings resistant to bombs. Resistant, but not immune. Kaffa countered, and took a big sip of his juice. Now, really, if we look at the bigger picture, creating domain holders is really a game of numbers. If the odds of finding someone who can be a domain holder is 1 in a billion, then we need to get billions on our side. Eons should therefore claim the worlds that have the highest populations, convert them to our side, and from this large pool, there will be some talents. That made Edna shift a little uncomfortably. I don't generally view it as a game of numbers. Domain holders can emerge from anywhere, and what matters more is the institution designed to support that growth. Edna, in her heart, believed that the ability to reach the domain is actually a lot more common, but it is the institutions around them that encourage that sort of excellence. But they must have the talent. The special thing that pushes them beyond that last step. Kaffa said. We have it, somehow. But, we need more domain holders, and I say it is not something that can be manufactured. Yes, the infrastructure is important, but we are ultimately looking for gems in a wheat field. Edna and Kaffa glanced at each other. So you advocate for the heavily populated worlds? Yes, Kaffa stated. There will be talent. They can be trained into craftsmen. I would choose worlds with large existing populations which can be redirected into other causes. Either as potential domain holders, or as the craftsmen and all that needed for the rest of us. Gimmicks like Drakes are unnecessary. I don't see how they can contribute against the Demon King, even if they were stronger. They'd have to be domain holders to even have the right to stand up there with us. The rest of the 4 waited for him to continue. So, if it was up to me, I'd take Delvegard, Magisar, Twin Continents as my 3 clone locations. Delvegard because it fits with the second and third goal of supplying equipment. Magisar because it also provides a supply of craftsmen, and Twin Continents because it has the numbers to create domain holders and also craftsmen. The rest can be nodes. We don't even have enough nodes. Edna countered. Let me flip the question around. Which world would you give up on? How many do we need to give up on? 3. We have 15. Edna said. 3 clone slots, and 10 node trees. 2 of them are already on Delvegard and Landis, but we can count the one deployed on Landis as something we can move around. If we deploy a node on the anti-magic sand world to boost our anti-magical weaponry, we'd be down to 9 nodes, so we have to leave 4 worlds. Deadworld's a clear choice for the first world to give up on. Kaffa continued, but he hesitated with the remaining 2. Maybe Landis. What? That made Rune squirm. I thought Landis was a good world. Elves. Kaffa stretched, his views colored by his little stint on Delvegard. He wasn't impressed by the giant colossus fielded by the Delvegardian dwarves. In his mind, he could crush them single-handedly. What use were these things before the demon kings? The huge mountains we have to climb to repopulate it means it wouldn't be useful to us so soon. Elves also take a lot longer to reproduce compared to the other races. In a game of numbers, we must churn through recruits to find the gems. So, even lesser dragons are unique types of races. Sure, they have some value, but in the end, it is the domain holders that make the difference. Edna shook her head slightly, as she remembered their own talks much earlier. The domain holders had to advocate for their worlds, and this was Kaffa doing his part. Talking about Delvegard is a good point. Johann touched his chin. Does Eon intend to keep one of his nodes as a spare? Nodes can be thrown across the Void Sea, and that has some value. Let's assume Eon keeps one as a spare. So there will be 5 worlds where we wouldn't have Eon's direct presence, and our presence there will depend on the Void Mages. The knight stated her view then. These 5 worlds without Eon's presence should be those that are still the strongest. Worlds that are in least need of our assistance. They can somewhat fend for themselves. That means the 3-ringed world and the hero sword world of Kaval. Kaffa thought. Maybe this new Gigant Dragon world too, once we slay the Demon King. The rest of them are in pretty bad shape. Edna said. There were pockets of resistance in all worlds, but there were not many structural factors in their favor. Only Kaval with all their scattered anti-demon hero swords, the 3-ringed world with their purple darkness, and maybe Shan, the flooded world had some natural anti-demon advantages. Rune then asked. The world of twin continents appears to be stable. For now. The lizardfolk countered. To achieve Hawa's objective, we still have to free up the demon continent. I doubt they actually have the strength to do anything if the Demon King lands on their continent, instead of where it currently is. We need a full dossier on the strength of these worlds. Johann said. Something we can only conclude once the rest of the Valthorns enter them and start gathering information. I quite like Delvegard, and I do agree with Kaffa's assessment partially. Our goal for doing this really is to build strength quickly, and yes, numbers help. But we don't have to dominate worlds like the twin continents. If what we need is resources and talent, that can be through a strong recruitment presence. I think a clone is a damned good statement to their population. Kaffa said. Rune shook his head. We are not sure if that's what impresses them. A large show of force may be counterproductive. Some races are like that. That made Kaffa pause. I guess that is fair. But the 3-ringed world is unique. Maybe Eon would unlock something unique. Through his presence there. Izar suddenly asked. He does get unique blessings and Soul Forge abilities when he has access to unique worlds. The other 4 domain holders looked at each other. I kinda forgot he got that. It happens so rarely. Edna laughed as recalling some old facts. But yes, Eon also needs a clone presence on a particular world, to get hero fragments when their heroes die. So if we want fragments, then Eon must place a clone on Gigant Dragon. Snex also petitioning for a node to be placed on Eulera. Izar added. So 6 worlds without Eon's presence. Edna said. Can our Void Mages support that much troop movements? People. Probably. Resources. No. Our forces there will have to source a lot of native resources. I'll need to get central to do the numbers. Rune clarified as it dawned on the 5 domain holders that they would all be working with fairly limited resources. Void Mages spend days to recharge their Void mana, and opening portals through the Void Sea from one world to another consumes a large amount. By my guess, we'd have to deploy almost all our Void Mages if we want to maintain near constant communication and troop movement. That'll be hard. Do we have information on their Demon King's invasion frequency? Edna asked. I think that should also be something we need to consider for our next battle. We've known for a while that it's exceptionally hard to move large quantities of weaponry through void magic alone. Our experiences on the Demon's Comet. 15 worlds demonic invasion frequency. I thought we were supposed to collect HTAT somewhere. On everyone. Again, suitable for a recruitment type presence where we don't have to exert control or continuous presence. Rune said, while rubbing his head. Alright. Maybe we stop this for a bit and prepare for our next trip. 12th world, Gigant Dragon. Stella's void portals brought both Lumoof and Stella to the furthest end of the gigantic dragon's tail. There were areas that experienced massive magical interference, which Stella soon concluded to be related to the magical ley lines that flowed through this odd-shaped world. The ley line took the form of a massive demonic spire, and it thrummed loudly, as if it was a mountain-sized demonic factory, churning out demons by the hundreds. Each of the demons that appeared were large demonic creatures, some resembling regular demons, some looked as if they were cobbled together from a pile of unwanted designs. Well, Lumoof's spiritual eyes zoomed into the mountain, and we saw the way magic of the ley lines were entangled with the demonic energies seen throughout the mountain. At the very heart of the artificial demonic mountain, there was a glowing fragment that we knew immediately what it was. A fragment of the Demon King, in both flesh and spirit. Lumoof glanced at Stella, and shook his head. The Demon King left a part of him here to tap into the ley line. Well, then let's destroy it. Lumoof nodded, and he activated avatar mode. Power surged through him, as his fury brought a torrent of magically empowered roots through the mountain. I felt it as the roots he summoned slammed through the demonic spires, it crushed everything in its path, and then abruptly slammed into something hard. We focused and saw a gigantic floating scale of a dragon, but with demonic features. It was charged with demonic energy, similar to that of the Demon King. We got company, Stella said. Look up. The skies above us seemed as if it was torn apart by the void, and within it, the head of the twin-headed Demon King popped out. Teleportation. The ley lines are also markers. Stella laughed. It seems the demons are learning from us. Lumoof rolled his eyes, as the Demon King's two heads charged with magical energy. A coincidence. Think we should bail? Stella nodded. We should hit the demons with numbers. The Demon King certainly can't be everywhere. The Demon King's energy blast poured out of its two mouths like water from a powerful fountain. It slammed right into a wall of wood, and like a powerful jet of water, it cut through the wall of wood. But the wall of wood was much thicker, and regenerated. Well, get us out of here, Lumoof said, as his energies charged his shields. The Demon King's second energy blast also slammed into the shields. We were fairly certain that this Demon King's power was up there, because of its energy-draining mechanic. Once weakened, it's likely fairly weak. Stella shook her head. Think we'll have to run. The Demon King's presence is bending void space. Was that supposed to happen? Lumoof looked at the void domain holder, even though there were two magical jets of energy slamming into the shield. Well, the Demon King's distortion of the void wasn't that pronounced normally. I'm guessing it's simply because this Demon King has a higher power level. I can manage short-range teleportation, though. Think this is the strongest Demon King we've seen on the peripheral worlds so far. A part of me actually wants to see how much stronger it could get, if it has control of even more ley lines. Lumoof mused idly. A little of my tendency to consider wild outcomes infected my avatar. Well, can you push back with your shields, and we'll buy some room to run. Once we're back with the cavalry, we can hit it with a multi-pronged attack. What makes you think it doesn't have countermeasures? Lumoof laughed, as he channeled more of his mana into the multiple layers of wooden shields. The wooden shields regenerated rapidly, and then, the floating wooden shields pushed in the direction of the Demon King's two jets of power. Stella shrugged at his question, but she charged up a large spear imbued with void energies anyway. I'll hit it with this, and then we run, got it? Sure. The two-headed Demon King landed on the ground, and Lumoof began to sweat. It's been a while since we had a workout. You're doing great. Now push that attack back and let me stun it for a bit. Got it. Lumoof called on the full power of the avatar, and amplified by the fury of the avatar state. The shields grew massively, even as the Demon King's two heads poured its magical power into the blast. Bit by bit, the wall of wood pushed back. A small moment of vulnerability opened, and Stella's spear of void energies flew towards the Demon King like a reality-distorting bullet. It slammed into the body of the Demon King. Its explosion sent a messy mix of void energies through the Demon King's body. For a moment, the Demon King staggered from the blow. Lumoof followed with his own attack, as gigantic roots just as large as the Demon King appeared from the ground and wrapped around the Demon King. It wouldn't be enough to hold the Demon King for long, but the few seconds was enough for the two domain holders to flee far enough and activate a portal. We knew that didn't work. Weera and Raja listened as we updated them on our attempt to attack the ley line. The Demon King has some kind of teleportation or beacon ability that allows it to move to its captured ley lines. Oh, then we will have to split up and attack together. The heroes were now in a much better state of health, and in the small moment of peace, they worked to repair the hero items scattered throughout Gigant Dragon's defensive lines. Well, yes. But let's wait for the cavalry. Lumuf said. Cavalry. 297. The Tree Towers. Year 274, Part 3. Gigantodragon. Lumuf stopped at an uninhabited part of the frontier. Gigantodragon's frontier are all battle-scarred battlegrounds. The slender, twisting cylindrical nature of the long serpent dragons meant the demons' path, in some ways, were fairly constrained. The demons controlled from the middle half onwards, all the way down to the end, or as the locals called it, the tail of the dragon. All this while, the heroes held the line in the middle. They tried to stop the Demon King from gaining control of more ley lines. It did, but the heroes also leveled, so the two forces were in a fairly fragile stalemate. It's been over a year since we started the exploration of the peripheral worlds, and as we drew closer to the end of the peripheral scouting campaign, it was also time to flex our strength. Partly, that desire was also our own self-interest. Gigantodragon was home to 2 living heroes, and we wanted to add them into our fold. 2 additional heroes would bring the total to 7, and that was a really respectable strength. Lumuf looked around, kneeled, and his palm touched the ground. A magical seed emerged from it, and immediately sunk into the ground below. It was a deep greenish object that shone even though there was land and soil. The node tree emerged out of the basketball-sized seed, and spawned outwards into a giant tree. Even though it was just a node, this was the moment when my roots connected with the soil of Gigantodragon. It knew, and so, I saw visions. A land of dragons and monsters. Giants. A rough, untamed land with powerful terrain. Volcanoes, and huge tsunamis. Towering mountains. Raw fury. Creation, and destruction. Power. It was a relief to me. Gigantodragon only took the form of a dragon, but not the mind of one. Through the node tree, the rest of my domain holders, and the rest of the heroes came over. I feel a little bad for Alka. He's missing out on so much. Edna said as she stepped through. He'll catch up. Lumuf shrugged. But you know, Edna. I made up my mind. Oh, let me guess. Towering Avatar. Edna smiled, as if she already predicted it. Exactly. Lumuf agreed, as we felt the attention of the Demon King on us. The presence of so many heroes must have drawn its attention. The Demon King could see heroes. It has a mental link to sense those with star mana. Edna stretched, as she prepared for what's next. I too intend to go for Martial Paragon. We've seen 12 worlds, and from what I've seen in these worlds, our job is to go tall, not wide. The Valthorns and future new domain holders can cover and compensate for the weaknesses of not selecting the wide option, but they cannot compensate for what only we can do. They cannot compensate for raw power against the Demon Kings. For us too, I believe tall is the way. Unless you're Eon, or maybe Stella. Lumuf smiled. For utility-type domain holders, wide has its advantages. But at this point, both level 200 stretched, and made their choice. Well, then let's greet our demonic foe with our new powers. Gladly. I'd love to see how I fare. The entirety of Gigantodragon felt it, as if the air itself thrummed with power. Their choice was like a shockwave that rippled throughout the fabric of reality. Edna's physique form did not change, but from then on we knew she was on par with a hero. In some ways, maybe she was even more. I suddenly felt a wave of nostalgia. This has been a really long journey, and I thought of the little elven girl that grew up with me, and Jura, who died in my service. Edna was living proof that the people too can match the heroes. Lumuf's choice, the towering avatar, was an experience for me, as well as for him. We were already connected, but there is always an opportunity to be even more connected. Do you not fear for your sense of self, Lumuf? I asked. I feared for the man. Lumuf stood on that hill, his eyes staring into the demon-controlled half of Gigantodragon. That choice was gone the day I chose your subdomain. Eon, it is time to go. The rest of them could feel the tangible difference in Edna and Lumuf. Rune clapped his hand. Well, Edna, leave some scraps for us, will ya? Edna smiled. Each of us will split up. I'll be the bait, and handle one spot by myself. Lumuf too. The rest of you will strike other ley lines in pairs. Stella will stay back to give us a path out, just in case. Kaffa, Izar, Rune, Johan nodded. I kinda wish Alka's here. His self-detonation would make things pretty easy. He'll have his chance. Edna said. There are many more Demon Kings to go. True. Edna went first. Send me to the Demon King. Stella smiled. Got it. Edna stepped through the portal, as close as Stella could send her. She arrived at another part of the frontier, where the two heroes waited. The Demon King was just over the hill. It was getting closer. You're the cavalry. Raja and Weera looked at the female knight. Part of it. Now, my two heroes, I think you better spend your time destroying whatever demonic structures the Demon King put on the ley lines. Get out of here. But, I'll keep the Demon King occupied. You, alone. Yes. Edna's quest swords emerged, and her summoned magical knights appeared around her. I am enough to keep him occupied. Make haste, heroes. There are ley lines to be destroyed, and we don't know how long the Demon King will fall for the trick. Edna and Lumuf's role were to be the bait. Edna would first attempt to hold the Demon King and prevent it from hitting the other locations. With her duty beyond life and death, and her various buffs, she would be able to frustrate the Demon King significantly. Lumuf would be the second bait, or harpoon. If the Demon King moved elsewhere, Stella would move Lumuf to that location, where if needed, he would summon my image, and I'd then hold the Demon King back with my abilities. That, in theory, should also buy quite a bit of time for the rest of them to destroy even more ley lines. Between us, we were fairly confident we could destroy multiple ley lines. If the plan went well, the Demon King should be significantly weakened, we would then have everyone converge on the Demon King, and destroy it together. Or, if we were confident, Edna, myself, and Lumuf would take on the Demon King ourselves. I hoped we could replicate that first victory on Lavaworld against the Demon King, this time with only domain holders without the spawn bombs. We wanted this strategy to work. We wanted to know that we were ready. A success would be all the evidence we need. And it went swimmingly. There was something beautiful about watching a plan work perfectly well. The battle-scarred land saw battle once more, as the fury of a war goddess descended on the empowered Demon King. Edna struck first. She attacked with multiple anti-magical spears that disrupted teleportation, and left a few quest weapons that created some kind of anti-teleportation field. Her quest weapons were all incredibly powerful weapons, collected over her many journeys into her strange pocket dimensions. The Demon King staggered as Edna's weapons now packed a punch comparable to the hero's, and it was something I could feel in her presence. Joy. She was always frustrated that she lacked the ability to deal substantive, real, damage. Not anymore. Her quest weapons shimmered with her domain's power, the aura of a blade that was no longer in the mortal realms. The Demon King was torn, it clearly sensed something was wrong elsewhere as the rest of my domain holders and heroes swept through the demon-controlled lands and easily destroyed the demon structures. The Demon King's other head kept looking elsewhere, as if trying to pull it towards other things. It knew it was needed elsewhere. It wanted to leave, while its first head bombarded Edna with attacks. But Edna's series of anti-magical weapons prevented it from going too far, and the army of magical summons created by the knight ensured its every movement was not without obstacles. Your opponent is here, Edna roared, as the Demon King attempted to create a portal. It crumbled when Edna's anti-magical spear slammed into the rift and interfered with the Demon King's attempt to open a portal. Her spears and swords struck the Demon King, and pierced through its regenerating skin. The creature was confused for a moment. A few strikes from Edna later, the Demon King realized it wouldn't be able to reinforce its back lines, and now both heads focused on the knight. It rained a set of attacks we've seen it use against the heroes. The Demon King's attacks were intensely powerful, but she shrugged them off. Its attacks were useless before, duty before life and death. She traded blows with the Demon King, and came out ahead every time. Is that all you got? Edna said with a laugh. The blast vaporized some of her summons, but they respawned soon enough. Come on. Fun. And slowly, we felt the Demon King's connection to its supporting ley lines fade. I feel like we're cheating, Rune said as the ley lines were crushed without much resistance. There were demon champions, and even champions that had additional power from the ley lines that put them as stronger champions. But stronger toys were still toys. We crushed them. Each of the domain holders swept through ley lines and destroyed them easily. Tens of ley line spires. Hundreds within half a day. The two heroes could not believe how they managed to waltz through the demon's battle lines without the Demon King's disturbance. Will your friend be alright? The hero powers worked really well against the demonic spires, but the heroes were worried. Lumuf shrugged. She'll be fine. Come, let's keep going. It'll help her too. But she's alone. Oh, she's not alone. How much time does she have left? Stella, who was far away and facilitating the movement of people, nodded. About 6 days left. See, Lumuf. She'd last a battle of endurance and attrition for a week. We'll get back to her in time. What are you guys? Raja said with utmost disbelief. Lumuf said, it's kind of hard to explain while we're destroying demons. It's much easier if you visit us. You'll know once we kick this demon king's backside. After that, you two will go with us to our homeworld. And right now, your vacation ticket is held by that two-headed giant lizard. Edna and the Demon King traded blows, and progressively, the Demon King weakened. Edna's duty now lasted for a week thanks to her level 190 upgrade, and now with her level 200 power up, her ability to dish damage. A full day passed, and yet, Edna wasn't done. She was tired, and her stored magical abilities were spent. It was not the first time she fought without rest or sleep, but fatigue was still ever present. You know, Stella said from afar. It almost seems like you can win this alone. Not really, Edna said. It's regenerating almost as fast as I can deal damage. I think I've barely cut through half of its current form. You think there's a second form? I expect it to, Edna said. There's a reason why solo heroes rarely win against the Demon King. True, Stella said, as she coordinated the magical portals for the domain holders. Unfortunately, Raja and Weera had to run really quickly since they couldn't use her portals. Now if Lumuf gets his ass here, we'd have a chance. Edna said with a grunt. Her sword just made a deep gash in the Demon King's neck, but it was already regenerating. I could use Eon's spiritual interference. Hang in there for a bit. We're getting rid of the demonic spires. Lumuf countered through the shared messaging network. Gigant Dragon is a large place, and even if it was just a constant set of explosions and battles at every single location, there were still a lot of spires and corrupted ley lines that it would still take a while. Oh well. On average, it took the team just about half an hour, per team, to fully destroy one single corrupted ley line. There were hundreds of these corrupted ley lines all over Gigant Dragon. Just locating the ley lines without the demonic interruptions took some time too. Well, we missed it, Lumuf said, as Edna retreated on the 6th day. The Demon King was weakened considerably, as we've managed to remove about 2/3 of the ley lines. It was enough that the Demon King lost 1/3 of its strength. But I think we've achieved what we needed. All we need to do is recharge for a week or two, then this time, we hit it with everything we got. Edna shrugged, but it truly impressed the two heroes. You were flat out amazing, milady. Weera said, his eyes seemed to outright shine in admiration as they returned to sea. I need to rest for a bit. How many times can you do that? 5 times a year. Which is a little too much, I think. Which is plenty, Lumuf said. It's so damned overpowered. Not as overpowered as being able to respawn and split yourself where I can't find you. Edna smiled. After the attack on the ley lines, there was finally time to properly introduce the two heroes to the rest of them. We introduced the two heroes to their new peers. The heroes met and mingled. What happened was similar to what used to happen. Surprise, joy, and a sense of comradeship. It helped Samuel to feel like he wasn't alone. From 5 heroes, now there are 7. 7 heroes would definitely help. So, while the heroes rested, mingled, and swapped war stories, the domain holders readied for a second strike at the twin-headed dragon Demon King. Edna and Lumuf wanted a shot at the Demon King by ourselves. A battle, only with all the domain holders. A chance to prove that we could do it without the heroes, even without the beneficial terrain. The 7 domain holders gathered, and prepared to strike. The Demon King lost 1/3 of its strength, and with my domain holders fully healed, it was time to put our strength to the test. Were we ready to fight a Demon King without our beneficial advantages? The two-headed Demon King stood waiting, and Lumuf grinned at the already weakening king. Eon, are you ready? Yes. I've fought Demon Kings over the years, and just like my domain holders, it is now a chore. With Lumuf's new powers, I expect the creature to be fairly easy to defeat. As it was now, it was not much stronger than an average Demon King. Let's go. Lumuf moved first. His first act was close in, as close as he could get, and immediately summoned my presence. I emerged almost instantaneously, an experience similar to a clone. Eon's spirit. But I wasn't real. Not the way a clone is. Instead, it was a magical replica, and my form was clearly magical, because it was somewhat transparent. An outline of magic, like a shadow. Despite the appearance, it carried the full weight of my presence, as all of my aura spread throughout the land. My presence was like a heavy blanket that coated everything around us, all the lesser demons were rendered immobile. But my attention was on the Demon King, and instead, I felt pity. It didn't feel that strong. Not with its weakened state. One of its heads blasted a beam of energy at my trunk, but my wooden shields blocked it easily. My powers were stronger thanks to all my levels and Lumuf's newer buffs, and my roots surged out of the ground. My roots were massive things, as if a gigantic tree far larger than the Demon King had somehow transformed into the tentacled limbs of a wooden kraken. So, my roots wrapped around the Demon King, and drained its mana. The Demon King struggled, and found itself losing the exchange of both strength and magic. At that point, Lumuf looked at Edna. I think we're probably going to be unnecessary very soon. But Edna's face was one of utmost happiness. She was delighted to see how my spiritual roots easily overpowered the Demon King, and how I drained the Demon King of its energies. I consider this a part of the journey. If Eon can't even do this, how do the rest of us hope to face what's on the Demon Sun? Come, let's make this swift. We got more worlds to clear. I felt the Demon King attempt various things to free itself, but I knew for certain now that I was strong. My spiritual energies tampered with its ability to regenerate. My roots drained it of its mana. My roots punched holes in its flesh. And my domain holders killed the helpless Demon King without much of a scratch. It was easy. So, incredibly easy. We won. I gained 2 levels. You are now level 267. But I didn't mind. Trivializing Demon Kings is what I should do as the leading god of my growing pantheon. It would be a battle we'd have to fight on more worlds. But this was a boost of confidence. We now know we can do it ourselves. 298. Contemporary considerations. Gigant Dragon. Gigant Dragon was freed from its Demon King, and it was the beginning of our occupation of the peripheral worlds. We would need to hold off the Demon Kings until Hawa could fulfill his end of the bargain, and so Lumuf wanted to take our battle to the Demon Kings. We would now plan to remove the rest of the Demon Kings, and gain levels in the process. From this battle, Lumuf and Edna gained 1 or 2 levels too. Their experience gain was slow, and at this point, they needed the hero fragments. The subject of hero fragments did feel a little sensitive. I didn't want the heroes to die. They were a force I could deploy quite easily with Lumuf functioning as a mobile warp gate. You know, I never quite realized how overpowered you two are. Rune said. His contribution in the final battle against the Demon King was decent, but largely, the battle was fought by myself, Lumuf, and Edna. Lumuf laughed. It was the right set of enemies. Eon did the bulk of the work. I genuinely thought the Demon King looked quite pitiful, when it struggled against Eon's big-ass roots. It felt like the Demon King was a whale struggling against a gigantic kraken. Stella quipped, easily amused. But boys, let's clean this up, and we have more to do. With the Demon King out of the way, the domain holders and heroes quickly swept through the rest of Gigant Dragon and eliminated all the remnant demons. There were still demonic spires all over the place, and this process took them about 6 weeks. But the demons were gone, and we saw the pathway through the Void Sea link to a demon world crumble. These days, with Stella's upgraded abilities, she could get a code on the Demon's Rift, so we could still locate these worlds. How many more levels before you get your level 200 ability? Lumuf looked at Stella. A lot more. I'm about to hit level 180. Hopefully I will get a decently strong domain ability then. The Void Mage continued. I knew we needed her at level 200. Given how strong level 200 abilities are, it's likely some of the drawbacks of the Void Mage classes could be mitigated with her higher levels. Gigant Dragon was beautiful. Without the demon's presence, the natural weather of the tail half of the planetary dragon returned. The demonic spires no longer drained away the magical ley lines, and instead, those ley lines returned to their natural state, and transformed into gigantic magical sculptures. The ground beneath them transformed just as quickly, as the space around the ley lines were warped into doorways that led into dungeons. The tail half was the frontier for the dragonlings of Gigant Dragon, at least, before the demons conquered it. Now, there were a few ancient cities buried under the demonic sludge from a time long before the demons. The domain holders had to keep moving. There were 3 more worlds to go. A switch flipped in the minds of both Weira and Raja when the Demon King died, and suddenly, they seemed normal. What was an almost crazy obsession with the demons vanished, and instead, both of them looked thoroughly exhausted. As if their minds were forced to maintain a high level of performance for too long that now, the sudden emptiness just made them unsure what to do. In a way, we contributed to that. We defeated the Demon King, not the heroes, and so, they lacked the sense of achievement. They were now willing to travel with us back to Treehome, to visit the old hero journals, and for once, have a normal life. They actually seemed keen. So, Now that Lumuf could function as a mobile teleportation pad, all he needed to do was touch them, and I could send them to Treehome. Their visit went pretty much as expected. The heroes experienced a little culture shock to see Treehome now resembling a solarpunk version of their human cities. It made me feel happy to see how excited the existing heroes were to introduce the two newcomers to Freshka. Freshka was pretty much the most advanced city we know of, with many magical equivalents of facilities known to man. Freshka is the central node for transport between the worlds, and also the political headquarters of everything related to the Valtrian order. Naturally, this meant a need for embassies, and various support staff associated with such diplomatic events. The confluence of diplomacy, and the high amounts of youths receiving education in the multiple colleges throughout the greater Freshka region led to the rise in entertainment and consumer options similar to the heroes' own home worlds, and a vice network that we controlled. It was a guided development, primarily driven by our intelligence department. Such entertainment and vices meant these officials and embassies were lulled into a sense of familiarity and comfort. It loosened up their guards. It was easier to obtain a favorable agreement when it was whispered to their ears by a charming companion. Theaters, plays, concerts, bars and clubs, forums. Nobles everywhere were mortal after all, and we used both carrot and stick to get what we wanted. The heroes were wined and dined, and treated to entertainment options that reminded them of home. The change happened so slowly over the years that the existing heroes didn't notice how they were now sucked into the entertainment culture and lifestyle. Even Kay didn't notice, until Raja and Weera both looked at her and asked. Is this all really okay? It's fine for us to get free entry and reserved seats at these entertainment areas. Since most of the entertainment options in Freshka were indirectly controlled by the Valtrian order, we set up special rooms meant for unique situations. This meant private viewing balconies, special guest rooms, and all that sort of thing, for my domain holders and also for the heroes. Kay paused, and that was when it hit her that we were now doing what the churches did to her peer, Alvin. She gulped. Yes, it is. 13th. Kuber. The world where the dead do not move on. Rune, Johann and Izar frowned when the portal placed them right in the center of a mountain of bones. Man, there were bones everywhere, and they watched as the magical gray clouds rained bones of different shapes and sizes around them. Rune stared at Johann, and Johann stared at Izar. Who was it that said worlds can't get any weirder after Lumuf's giant dragon? Here, Exhibit 1. A world that rained bones. Where did they come from? Izar looked at the rain of bones smashed into his magical artifact. The bones were surprisingly hard and smashed into the ground. The ground itself was covered in bones. Magic, I bet. Or some core shenanigans. Rune said. The ranger picked up some of the bones that rained, and noticed they weren't actually animal bones. They were just shaped like bones, and made of the same stuff. There was a kind of magical cloud above them that produced these bones. It is probably more appropriate to call them bone stones than actual bones, since they are just bone-like, but not actually the bones of an animal or monster. Rune said, as he examined them in greater detail. Fair. That's probably a better way to wrap our heads around it. His fellow domain holder said, as they kept exploring. The clouds of the world were a storm of magic. They could feel the intense magics coming from their bonastone creating clouds. Well, think we have living beings to see. That was when a spirit, a white, appeared before our very eyes. You three are far from the lands of the living. Return to the lands of the living, the Deathlands are not for you. The spirit's voice was like the whisper of the wind. Rune looked at the white. There were a million things he wanted to ask, but decided not to. Could you point us the way? The spirit pointed. That way. If you walk at the normal living pace, you will reach the kingdom of Merclans in 6 days. Very well. What lies in the Deathlands? Rune continued with his question. The nations of the departed spirits. It is the land where creatures like me form our nation. Heck, Rune said, a little surprised. Well, I suppose we should go that way, though, I think this world would probably interest Lumuf. Rune, Johann and Izar eventually did encounter the kingdom of Merclans, which was not a special kingdom. It was only one of many humanoid kingdoms, and throughout the area, all the living kingdoms came to be known as the kingdoms of the living. The land of the living were kingdoms of faith, where the priests of Hawa and Gaia roamed. When the folks of the living lands die, they ship their corpses over to the Deathlands. This was organized by a group that existed with the support of the Hawa and Gaia temples, the Deathmen. The Deathmen would ship the corpses to the Deathlands, and the Deathlands would pay for their services in goods from the Deathlands. They trade with the dead. Rune explained over our communication network. I'm headed there now. We both had 1,000,001 questions, and so, my avatar quickly headed over. The living kingdoms were fairly normal. They were mainly humans, but there were some slightly longer-lived dwarves and halflings, organized around kings and supported by priesthoods. But as Lumuf arrived, he could see something different about this world. It was something only obvious to Lumuf, and yet, he wondered whether the local priests knew. Not all souls escape this world. Instead, for the corpses that were shipped to the Deathlands, their souls, still partly bound to their flesh, are turned into these spirits. Lumuf theorized. Their corpses are linked to their souls. Though the soul may have separated, if someone meddles, it is possible to pull the soul back into the corpse. It's a feature that worked both ways, just like how we were able to restore souls from old personal items of a person, because there were fragments of that person's soul in them. I believe there is a domain-level individual deep in the Deathlands. Lumuf said, and so, for once, our suspicions were true. Once we paid attention, we could sense it, the small ripples of space of a domain holder. Deep in the Deathlands, there's clearly something, or someone, that could tamper with souls to create these wights and deathlings. Could it be friendly? Rune said. I don't know. Lumuf said. The only way to know is to go and see it. And I'll only do so when I am at full strength. Just in case. Fighting another domain holder is an iffy thing, and we are not exactly sure what kind of powers this other domain holder had. Domain holders, at least those we've met, were all slightly eccentric existences that didn't like to be surprised. So, we knew from experience that I couldn't just barge into the depth of the Deathlands and be well received. So, we needed to figure out a way to send a message, one that would be favorably received by the other side, and we could then meet to truly understand them. Okay, I'll come back in a while. Lumuf said. I've got other places to go, but for now, the three of you, maybe help to figure out what's up with the heroes, and do research on past alliances, discussions and communications with the kingdoms of the dead. The goal is to establish communication. Peacefully. Without scaring them. Got it, boss. Rune said. My avatar rolled his eyes, but we knew it was in jest. The kingdom of the living occupied 2/3 of this world, while the remaining third, was the kingdoms of the dead. The Demon King, occasionally, would spawn in the Deathlands, and those in the Deathlands would band together to destroy it. When this happened, it was called the Week of the Waking Nightmares. For a week, people all over the world would have nightmares, and it almost seemed as if spirits appeared all over the world. This was a fact that worried me, because it suggested that the Deathlands had a weapon powerful enough to destroy Demon Kings, though, from what we've seen so far, the Deathlands stuck to itself. If it could take on Demon Kings, then it could definitely take on domain holders. Maybe it was something like the blood sacrifices and the hex bombs of the blood mages, because whatever was in the Deathlands clearly knew how to manipulate souls and turn them into wandering spirits that couldn't move on in their cycle of reincarnation. It was possible this domain holder got further along the path of weaponizing the incredible powers of the soul. If so, maybe the power of the soul is what we need to destroy the demon sun. Anyway, information from the living nations was scarce. They didn't have insights into the nature of the Deathlands, and all their interactions with the dead spirits were for trade and commerce. The dead spirits didn't reveal about the intricacies and inner workings of the Deathlands, though communication was clearly possible with these dead spirits. The heroes, if summoned, would arrive at the kingdoms of the living, and the dead spirits are usually not hostile. Their first instinct is to chase the living out of the Deadlands, and only raise their weapons if such actions were repeated and their attempts to remove the living were stopped. There was, to our surprise, still one hero surviving and living in this world. He defeated the last demon king that arrived about 20 years ago with the aid of the Deathlands, and since then retired to the countryside. A man who clearly wanted to live and have a family. Rune, Johann and Izar discovered the hero living in a quiet, picture-perfect valley surrounded by a farm. There were cows, chickens, fields of vegetables and wheat. There were 3 beautiful children running about. The oldest one looked like he was in his teens. When they knocked on the door, a tall, well-built man greeted them. He was dressed like a farmer. Greetings. You are the hero, Gideon. I'm Gideon, yes. The hero and the 3 exchanged looks, and the hero eventually added. But no, I'm no longer an active hero. No longer. Well, no. Rune looked around. Can we come in and talk? We don't mean your family any harm. Gideon looked around, and back at them, and shrugged. Well, no weapons, but sure. Come on in. The home was fairly simple as hero homes went. It didn't have the common features of hero homes seen elsewhere. It was something Rune immediately noticed, at least compared to the homes of Colette and Prabhu, or Kefri or Adrian. Instead, it was clearly designed to resemble a picturesque farmhouse. It had large glass windows that allowed plenty of sunlight in, and a view of the valleys. It was functional, and almost entirely made of wood. A beautiful place, Rune said, certainly unlike the homes of the other heroes. Thank you. Come, there isn't much, but you can sit. Gideon's kids noticed, and looked worried. They came over, but the hero patted their head. Go to your rooms, kids. Daddy gotta talk to some visitors. The three nodded, and Gideon's wife, a beautiful mature lady with golden blonde hair, followed their kids into their room. You're not from here, are you? Gideon said frankly. Yes. Rune sat and nodded. There's sort of two reasons why we came, so we'll get right down to it. Gideon sipped his mug of water. Well, sure. 1. We're recruiting heroes. We've formed a coalition of heroes to fight the demon kings across worlds, and we'd like you to join us. Gideon stared at Rune, and sipped his mug again. So there are worlds other than this one that also have demon kings? Yes. How many have you recruited? 7. Well, 5, but 2's new and maybe they'll join us. That's a lot of power in one team. Gideon said. True. But there are even more worlds. Rune said. Gideon paused, and then sighed. Honestly, you came a little bit too late. I'll tell you why, but what's the other one? You've been to the Deathlands. The hero stared at Rune, this time seriously. As if judging him. What is it? What's in the Deathlands? Gideon paused and shook his head. Why? We sense something unusual in the Deathlands. It is as if souls were captured and unable to move on. There's a strange emptiness in their lands. I see you already have an inkling. What is in there? Is an undead demigod. The Osroids. Rune leaned forward. Both Johann and Izar looked around, as if anticipating a sudden strike. What else do you know about them? We hear some really fascinating tales about the Deathlands, and we want to know what we are dealing with, and whether it is friendly. Gideon frowned. Friendly. It's an undead god that turns corpses into spirits, vampires and zombies. And yet its undead seems well behaved. Rune asked, a little puzzled. The dead need the living to replenish its souls and spirits. This is the balance of the world. If they didn't need the living they would have invaded us and killed us all. This peace exists entirely due to the ancient agreement by the Church and the Deathlands to sell corpses to the Deathlands. The hero said, with a sigh. What about the demons? Just an enemy of my enemy. Rune, Izar and Johann glanced at each other. Well, I suppose only Lumuf can handle such a thing. Rune then turned back to face the hero. Well, last question, why won't you join us? Simple. The Osroids gave a simple way to destroy the Demon King. It ripped a portion of the hero class out of my spirit, and used it to make a bomb. All three domain holders were stunned. It took a good 30 seconds before Rune's shocked face turned into a smirk. Oh boy, Lumuf's gonna have a field day with this one. Why? I think our Patreon god probably has a lot of similarities to these Osroids. And so you have an incomplete hero class. Yes. The three met outside. What the fuck's going on here? Izar cursed. That dude's a half hero or some shit. Rune nodded. Not what I expected, but I suppose so. Johann looked around. I think, what's really important to know, is whether the Osroids are some kind of threat to us. Izar looked a bit bewildered. I am guessing it'll be yes. It's some death manipulating domain holder with some soul type shenanigans. Let's not pass judgment so quickly. Just because it's using death power doesn't make it bad. What it's doing now seems fairly proper. It trades for corpses, uses souls from corpses to create its people, and used the hero's class somehow as a weapon. Rune countered. I think we should let Eon decide on this. I don't get it. Hawa clearly considers this world to be a peripheral world, and it loses faith points sustaining this world. Yet it clearly doesn't seem like it needs help, if this Osroid can use the hero class to destroy demons. It still needs the hero class to make the weapon, and that costs faith points. I reckon the act of summoning is what drains most of the faith points. Rune countered. So, the way to save Hawa's faith points is to blow up demon kings before new heroes are summoned. Yay. Pretty much. Then we'll need to make an agreement with this death god in the Deathlands. 299. Second to last. 299. The 14th world. The floating islands. Terrace. The land of the floating islands immediately evoked a sense of wonder when both Stella and Lumuf arrived. It was a world where it was a set of massive floating islands, and the land below was an infinitely dense and thick layer of white fluffy clouds. You know, when I was a child, I used to imagine worlds like this where everything is a floating island, and it's just a sea of white clouds. Each of us have our own islands, and we'd visit each other on flying ships. Stella said. Lumoof didn't relate. His childhood wasn't that vibrant. As a native of Treehome, his childhood was mainly trying to be useful to his parents. When they still lived, I can't say I understand, but it is quite beautiful. The sun was bright, and somehow floated overhead, and they noticed a strange contraption around the sun. It was always visible, a large gigantic screen that orbited around the sun. Strangely, there was a gigantic steel-like structure that connected the screen to the sun. When I saw it, my first thoughts were those planetary models commonly found in schools. Stella stared at it, as if trying to make sense of it. In a way that's somewhat similar to the three-ringed world, this world's day-night cycle is controlled by that screen thing. It moves to block the sun. Lumoof found it funny. As if this world is a toy. I mean, I suppose you could say that. Stella looked around and found bridges made of clouds that linked the island to other islands. Magical clouds. Man, this world is a fairy tale. I felt my avatar's sense expand, but because as a tree, our senses mostly propagate through the ground. And so it ends where the island itself ends. I tried to grapple with what I felt, and studied how the large islands floated, only to discover they were not exactly floating. They were suspended. I felt a strange, divine law type of string, and they bound each at every single island. They were commanded to float where they are, so they did. In short, divine power commanded the islands to float in the sky, and the world obeyed. Could you do something like that someday? Stella asked, once she realized the presence of divine power. I think it's not that simple. Such a command must have been woven into the world when it was created. The idea of commanding the islands to do so now seems silly, and wasteful. It's likely that there was some kind of foundational law that made it happen, which is why it persists even when these worlds theoretically drifted away from the range of gods. So, that sounds like there's a God-commanded divine laws, such as those commanded by Hawa, and a set of neutral, or core-bound, divine laws that are specific to each world's creation. Right. That's my guess. Stella nodded. And I found living folk. Humans. Regular, normal humans living almost idyllic, peaceful lives. They were farmers, farming on incredibly fertile lands. The crops they planted were familiar, though it was more of a mixed farm, with small patches of everything. There was magic in the land itself. It almost seemed as if the plants were growing before our very eyes, as if they were spurred on by the blessings of a level 70 to 80 druid. Oh hey there, it's been a while since we had visitors, but how did you arrive? I didn't see any flying ships or balloons. We walked. Stella answered. Oh, through the cloud bridges. I'm surprised people still do that. The farmer said. So, what's up? We're lost. Could you help us out? There were thousands, or even tens of thousands of floating islands, some larger, some much smaller. There were a set of larger floating islands known as the main islands, and these housed most of the humans in this world. The main islands were rich in all sorts of magical resources and metals, while lands further away lacked most natural resources and metals. Humans were the only population, but there were monsters on some of the islands, and these islands became known as the Magic Islands or Dungeon Islands, because these islands were the locations that spawned monsters. Monsters generally stuck to their own islands, though occasionally, flying monsters did attack their surrounding islands. The main islands were home to a series of kingdoms and empires, and wars were frequently fought between them. The further islands, like the one that they visited, were generally those that escaped the constant warfare of the main islands. Farming was somehow easy in all the islands, and each island usually had a series of naturally occurring springs that created lakes and rivers. Some of these worlds just absolutely defy understanding. How does the water cycle work in a world where everything's on floating islands? Stella rubbed her hair in her guest room. The farmers were friendly, and were more than happy to let them use the guest room once it was clear they were not hostile. Lumoof didn't answer her. He knew her long enough to know that she just needed to vent when things just didn't match how she understood reality. Stella slapped herself gently. All right, I know, each world has their own rules. Each world, own magic. Got it. Quirks of their reality. This is just how this world works. My avatar nodded. I do foresee all these different rules of different worlds will make it hard for the Valthorns to swiftly adapt to each world. They will have to spend some time to acclimatize themselves to how each world behaved. I might forget, if I'm suddenly sent back to say Landis, or say Gigant Dragon. Or that hex grid world where everything is controlled by divine laws. So, Cultural familiarity is going to be a big issue. Not just that, I could easily imagine representatives from each of these worlds are unfamiliar with the quirks of other worlds, and their well-meaning suggestions thus come off as weird or unhelpful to others. Stella paused. Oh, so you're talking about the order's structure across all these peripheral worlds. Yeah, it's been on my mind. Knowing Eon, the structure of how the order will function is highly likely to be delegated to a person that will be based long-term in that world. That warps our preferences, our understanding, especially non-domain holders who are not protected from the divine laws of each world. I imagine that anyone who spends a few years full-time at any of these peripheral worlds will get used to the local laws, that they lose touch with how things work elsewhere. So the order expansion is dead underwater. Not exactly. I mean, not all of these changes are that dramatic. The system and our powers still work on them. Just I suppose there will be some expectation and cultural differences that will emerge. We already have those differences. Stella said. That's why branchhold recruits and Treehome recruits have slightly different attitudes. It'll be worse with these peripheral worlds. It's just the urban-rural gap with even more skin. I'm sure it can be solved. We'll just need our own internal diplomats. Lumoof gave Stella a look of disapproval, and she eventually sighed. She rolled on her own little bed. I know, we're building even more bureaucracy into the system. We'll use Eons' Dream Academy and work around it. Frequent trips to Treehome to soak up our culture. That's what large guilds, corporations and governments do. I think it's too early to tell. Branchhold seems to integrate well, so far. So far, Lumoof said as he looked out the window of the guest room. The gigantic screen was starting to cover a part of the sun, creating a strange dimming of the world. Which is why I fear for worlds that won't be linked via a node or a clone. They will stray from Treehome's supervision. Even with us present, we can't hope to match Eon's trees. Stella decided to hop off the bed and walk to the window. Huh, that's quite a view. It is. It's like an eclipse. The seemingly white clouds now glowed, as if the world around us turned into darkness. Yet, it wasn't total darkness. The clouds themselves glowed. Imagine it happening every day. Stella said in a rare moment of wonder. Must feel pretty normal to the people here. The clouds are pretty. A sea of clouds that glowed. My avatar also took the time to bask in the beauty. I think I'd like to see it from the edge. The farmers didn't stop them, but the two walked uninterrupted to the edge. Demon kings, at least in the past, used to land in special islands. It seemed that every time the demon king was about to arrive, a new island would appear. That island was known as the Demon's Island, and it was a magical creation. A dark red glowing island that floated above all the other islands. Then, when the hero arrived, a chain of smaller islands would appear that allowed the hero to go and meet the demons. The demons were unable to use the cloud bridges, so they were often trapped on their own islands. It is only when flying demons appeared that they could expand to the other islands. When that happened, it was a huge disaster that caused a lot of deaths. These islands protect them, in the same way the oceans protected us. Stella said. Look at these clouds. They feel like they are partly magic. They probably are. Lumoof nodded, as he observed the clouds floating from place to place. Some of them were fluffy, some took the shape of streaks. The winds are pretty constant. They have a defined direction. Stella suddenly noticed. They all move in the same direction, at the same speed. Worldly magic. Lumoof said. I wonder what the last world would be like. Stella decided to just sit down at the edge. She wasn't afraid of heights, and somehow, she knew she wouldn't fall. There was a fundamental divine law that operated in this world, a kind of specific force unique to this world. I never thought I'd actually see a sight like this. There was the storm world with a floating island, remember? Lumoof said. That one wasn't this beautiful. Is it? I thought the turbulent storms were quite beautiful. They had so much energy, the flashes of lightning, the seemingly gigantic rivers of magic that turned into a cloud river. This is peaceful, calm, Stella said. I can see myself retiring somewhere like this. Someday, when all of this is over, I'd like a farmhouse too. I'd probably need a bit more necessities and stuff from Freshka, but one of these faraway islands would be nice. I'll plant some fruits and stuff. You could pick an island. The islands along the eastern oceans are still beautiful and untouched. It doesn't have this view. Stella smiled, and Lumoof stretched. He too decided to sit along the edge. It was a sensation I didn't enjoy. I didn't like my feet dangling midair. I very much preferred to be rooted down on something solid. Even these floating islands were a little too much for my liking. Lumoof took a deep breath. The air was clean. The two domain holders sat quietly, and both enjoyed the beauty. There were other islands in the distance, but the clouds obscured most of them from view. Let's go to the main islands tomorrow. Airships were everywhere, and they were armed to the teeth. The peace of the distant islands were soon replaced by the constant threat of war. Human kingdoms hated each other. Lumuf and Stella found the main islands of this world to be in a state of constant warfare. Large airships were built out of unique floating materials, and weapons mounted on them. Then they fought each other. There were 5 main islands, split into 3 main empires. The 3 human empires all maintained large fleets of airships of their own. War in these main islands were brutal, because the main islands were incredibly resource-rich. The islands itself were magical, divine and seemed to produce resources indefinitely. All that potential used to fuel a war against each other. A sickening testament to humanity. Stella cursed. It is in our nature. Lumuf said as we arrived in the capital of one of these large empires. Fleets of airships floated overhead, each of them filled with magical weapons. Their array of magical weapons were slightly more advanced than those found on the other worlds, though still quite behind those of the dwarves of Delvegard. The capital was fairly advanced, in the larger scale of things. Only the dwarven cities of Delvegard and the dragonling cities of Gigant Dragon could compare. But of all things, it was the islands themselves that truly got my attention. Just walking on the main islands I felt our souls, both mine and Lumuf, resonate with the ground below. The touch of divinity was woven into the ground, and it was similar to how a druid encouraged trees to grow. Here, some force caused the ground itself to spawn metals and crystals. Control of these main islands could significantly alleviate our resource problems. You can't be, Stella said. Wait, you're thinking about it. They use a lot of crystals and metals for their airships. They fight a lot of wars with each other. I see value here, just like Delvegard. Though, it would be similarly hard to get them to bend the knee. They already hate each other, and unlike the dwarves of Delvegard that generally respect and obey technical superiority, these humans would not be so cooperative. Stella and Lumuf were seen as travelers, farmers from afar that came to see the big city. So, it wasn't entirely problematic. Most of their gear were also hidden elsewhere, so they passed through security fairly easily, though some of their items failed in their presence. So much for peace, Stella said, as we walked through the city. The city was heavily militarized and there were constant recruitments for soldiers, and a massive industrial system built around supporting the war. It was like a more advanced version of Mountain World. I can see why the humans moved to the outer islands. 3 empires of humans, Air, Argon and Tofang, each with their airships, and there were frequent wars between them. Even now there were smaller skirmishes where their empires met. All 3 of the human empires worshipped Hawa, yet somehow, the church itself splintered into 3 sub-branches of Hawa. The Demon King wasn't here yet. The last Demon King came 15 years ago, and after that, there was a brutal war that saw the Demon King defeated. The stories spoke of how the Demon King died when the hero ascended into the demons' floating island and slew them. The island was destroyed, together with the Demon King. It'll be at least 5 or 6 years before the demons start appearing again. And so, the empires descended into war. I'm putting this world under the good for resources pile. Lumuf said. Just like Delvegard. Got it. I wonder what Edna sees in the 15th world. Stella said. We're finally done exploring, and we can then move on to the next stage. The Void Mage looked at the world at war. Do you think we can convince these 3 empires to lay down their arms? Lumuf laughed. If they do not listen to words, they'll have to listen to a very big swarm of beetles. 301. Border Control I. 301. Year 276. Magisar. We yield. The group of mages were battered, their leader unable to believe what happened. Half of the upper dome of the tower was blasted apart, exposing the top to the whims of the weather. A dwarven mage stood standing, in his hand a wooden stick made from one of Eons' many branches. A fragment of divinity, as a conduit for magic. Lozan looked at the Magisarian mages and wizards. Their shields shattered. Their staffs cracked. A group of them, defeated by one of Valthorn Archmages, a level 145 Grand Archmage named Blackmore, a rare dwarven mage. It wasn't hard at all to bribe enough of the mid-rank mages of the tower to support an unusual challenge for the tower. It was even easier once these bribed mages saw who exactly they were consorting with. Those whose eyes could still see, knew the winds were changing. Mages were generally smart. A certain level of intellectual prowess was generally necessary to understand the tomes and scrolls of earlier mages, though there were always those who intuited magic as if it was the back of their hands. Those were geniuses, and those were incredibly rare. Spectators, there were about 200 or so mages who belonged to the upper classes of the tower, unsure whether to clap or cheer. It was just pure silence. Lausanne smiled, and decided to set off the cheers. She clapped, and soon, those that she bribed took the cue to clap as well. Blackmore stood in the center. With his level, he easily dwarfed every other mage present. In their eyes, he must seem like a prodigy, and they are not wrong. Blackmore could be called one of those prodigies. Blessed with a gift for the higher magics that was really hard to translate, in the old dwarven societies he would have been forced into some kind of magical blacksmith, or alchemist. Instead, through the Valtrian Order's many academies, he escaped the constraints of the dwarven social order, and dabbled in more pure forms of magic. Lausanne knew how hard it was to train magic. She was there when the old wizard Madeus tried to train the new students. It's a shame that so many with talents were often educated in fields that did not exploit their strengths. She shook her head. Here they were, and so, the first of the towers. Blackmore declared, as he glanced about. Any more wishes to dispute our claim? The tower lords frowned. The female elf could see the disbelief in their eyes. All their lives they've worked towards higher magics. They dedicated their resources and efforts to their goals, and reached the level that couldn't go anymore. The cursed level cap. For Magisarians, it was also around level 85. For mages who reached that level, it must have felt like they've reached the end. They could not go higher. How? The tower lords asked. Maybe the question they should have asked was why. Blackmore was not protected by a domain, and thus, a high-level version of Inspect could give a level estimate. So they knew his levels must be very high. They could conclude it was some kind of Inspect confusion type of spell or ability, thus the number shown was a lie. But the strength he displayed was clear, and no one could deny the hole in their tower. The spectators were stunned to see a mage overpower so many of them so clearly. Blackmore nodded, as he turned to face the spectators. Eon's gift. I ask the crowd again. Does anyone wish to state their opposition to our demands? The tower lords could not believe it. What do you want? As is often said in our circles. Nothing for now, but eventually, everything. But I jest. Blackmore grinned. Our first goal will be a coalition of the towers. As of this day, and until the day the demons are driven back, we will now have full control of your military. Together, we will drive the demons back. Everywhere, the tower lords fought tooth and nail against the mages of order, but the gaps in strength between someone in the level 80s and someone in the level 140s was immense. The Valthorns won everywhere, but we did not become the new tower masters. If anything, the combined military forces of the towers would still pale compared to whatever we could field. But, it would deliver an impact. It was our moment of strength. A chance for the combined mages to see how high the tree grew, and where they stood beneath it. The Order would not be able to administer this world. It just didn't have the size or scale. It would be harder still to do with those entrenched in the current system resisting us at every step. The Valthorns concluded that the existing process and ruling system of the Magisarians were not compatible with our ways. We would not be able to fully capitalize on their strengths if we maintained their system. Thus, we would have to redo it our way. A statement of strength would lend credence to our legitimacy and ideas. This statement would win over allies. This statement is our way of telling the local military that there is another way. A complicated power dance to tell those watching that we have the power to protect them. That their tower masters were going to rot away in their towers. Ultimately, we were not bound by the rules of Magisar. The Order would create new sites, one of them with a node tree at its heart. Unlike the towers of Magisar that were all in various states of decay, a new city would be built in one of the reclaimed lands. Somewhere that would be fertile enough. A new city, and volunteers from the towers could then move to. With our strength, we would even set up a city right where the Demon King was. From the volunteers and those willing, the Order would form a new organizational structure of both these tower refugees and the Order. The young mages would be directly trained and supervised by the Order. Those entrenched in the old system would stay back, and they would bear witness to the gaps between us. How's things, Lausanne? Aben came over from Landis, and visited one of the newly constructed cities on Magisar. It was located in a valley, in a space that was reclaimed from the demonic corruption. Lausanne was made the temporary leader of the new city, as she was technically the most experienced person in the field. Given how thinly the Valthorns were spread across the worlds, it's not like they had that much of a choice. Other than the dwarven archmage Blackmore, who was slightly higher level than her, Everyone else was in the level 100s to 120s, while Lausanne was already firmly in the level 140s. It was a pace she didn't expect, yet somehow, everyone else seemed to think it was normal. Lausanne stood, and smiled at her teammate from their Landis tour. Hoya followed behind, as she too, appeared through the makeshift door. The elven temporary leader answered the Dark Knight. Slow, but moving. As is on Landis. People remain the hardest component of our struggle. Give them time. I see you've gotten all these built, at least. Aben pointed to the structures around them. Lausanne shrugged. The physical objects are easier to build. The Magisarians remain unnerved by these land-based cities. They've lived so long in their floating towers that they are still mentally scarred by life living so close to the lands. That's a problem that will take some time. Hoya looked around, and after a while, tapped Lausanne on her shoulder. Little to worry. A passive blessing from the aura of a prayer tree should fix that. Lausanne looked outside. There wasn't much of a view. Much of the Magisarian terrain was rocky and rugged. What of Landis? The lords are moving in to set things up, and the locals are generally compliant with what was asked of them. Have they assigned a lord to Magisar yet? The elf shook her head. Central claims they are not yet ready. Strange. Delvegard has 7 lords. Hoya frowned. Wonder what's happening on the field that's causing this. I was told that they're trying to get a mage lord. Lausanne regurgitated the answer from command. She would likely transfer that control to one of the dedicated lords or ladies once they arrived. Ah. Hoya and Aben clicked in acknowledgement. Specialized classes were harder to prepare for deployment. Certain ruling classes were harder to deal with. So for now, I'm the temporary leader trying to smooth things over. I do have some good assistants, and planners, though. Lausanne answered, though she did have her share of difficulties. Frustrations with the locals were mainly on the little microaggressions and resistances. The Magisarians have many quirks, and I initially hoped that they'd be smart enough to just accept us. I am sadly proven wrong. Though some of the mages accepted the deal, they were not going to accept all of the Valtrian requests. Their cities are not charred fields. Their villages were not burnt and destroyed. Aben said, it is only normal that they will fight for it. Those who lost almost everything will think of a chance to rebuild differently than those who are asked to tear down what exists. Lausanne didn't speak of the time when the village was ashes. A faint memory of a time when she and her mother were standing in what was a charred field of ash flashed before her eyes, and she glanced away. The Tower Masters thought of Blackmoor as powerful, but yet, still reachable. To them, if they worked together, maybe they had a chance. They schemed much a little too obviously. The Valthorns present were from a spread of disciplines, it wasn't hard to pick up on what they were trying. Even if they lost in a battle, they would not give up their posts without an attempt to wrestle it back in the dark. This was part of the process. They tried to speak to the Tower Masters. Yet somehow, all of the Tower Masters seemed cut from the same cloth. They were cunning, but not very wise. Even in the face of power, they'd rather control what little they have. They would not be the first to change how things were. Resistance came in many forms. For many of these Magisarians, there was a strong cultural undercurrent. Even in their new city, she noticed their subtle disapprovals. The clicks, the sighs, the subtle headshakes as they observed how things will be in the new city. In their minds, the towers are still the ideal to strive for. It was a cultural relic in their mind that they will need a few generations to change. This was the part of her tasks that was hard. Lausanne sighed. They were there to help, but it did irritate her that those who need help seem to think they don't. Hoya gave the elf a long, warm motherly smile. The matriarch placed both of her hands on both sides of Lausanne's shoulders, and tapped her reassuringly. A problem that will be solved in time. Those who have not felt the touch of divinity often doubt its existence. Such is the way of mortals. The mind is hard to change, and it takes overwhelming force to overcome one's mental inertia. Let us not dwell on the difficulties, but instead, let's celebrate successes. Show us what you've done. Lausanne led the group through a makeshift city built for the refugees and those who agreed to join them. Blackmoor, as the dedicated mage champion, went about and challenged all the towers, and after he completed the tour, there were refugees and those who wanted to join them. All in, about 10 to 11,000 Magisarians came to join the new city. Some were spies, but ultimately, the Valthorns had enough firepower and about 30 level 100s, more than enough to maintain a strong level of control over a single town. The Valthorns also brought in about 200 Valtrian Order support operatives from Treehome to handle construction and development of the new city. We've got these new wells, with these filtration trees that cleans the water. Lozon pointed. Aben and the crew were fairly familiar with most of the things. Clean water was a surprisingly rare thing on Magisar, and the locals developed quite sophisticated rainwater collection systems in their magical towers to supplement the missing natural water sources. One of the tweaks we had to make to the rhizofiltration trees was that the water content needed to be separated to remove some of the minerals that seemed toxic to the Magisarians. They have a zero iron diet, and their bodies adapted to it so well that iron is now fairly harmful to them. Aben nodded. Huh. The Landis elves seemed fairly normal. I wonder whether there is other stuff we'd have to look out for on the other worlds. Maybe the Caprans and the Dragonlings will have some unique quirks. Lozon agreed as she recalled what happened during the first few days. We only realized it after a few of them got sick. The water is fine now, but that was a rather careless blunder on our end. A proper biological study through one of Eons' biolabs should help. True. Aben walked about and noticed the homes built everywhere. There were magical shields constructed. They passed by a large farm, where the druids were in discussion with some locals over the plants. Food's a pain at first, but we're getting better. We can't use the food from our world because of their diet, so we'd have to restrict it to native plants. But their local plants all have low yields, because they are mostly a nation of harvesters and hunters, where their cities exist as areas to protect themselves from the demons, so their local plants were not selectively bred for yields. It'll take a generation or two to change it. Lozon narrated. Even if I see these Magisarian mages as useful, I wonder whether the order would eventually be overwhelmed with all the custom supply choices for each of these worlds' recruits. Standard rations that are not standard will lead to a large surge in logistic overheads. That does limit their external deployment options, isn't it? Aben thought about it. He rubbed his chin as he thought about the difficulties of keeping a Magisarian force fully supplied in remote locations. Unless they could use familiars. That's something we'd like to try. Lozon elaborated. We've not had a Magisarian with Eons familiars, so we don't know whether those familiars can produce Magisarian-compatible foods when they are operating out of the other worlds. Food, water, accommodations from Magisarians were simple, though they were initially unused to all the space they now possessed. On a spiritual level, the Treology priests provided a sort of calming effect on the populace using a mix of their various abilities. It is not an entirely new situation. Valthorns faced some difficulties a few decades ago when the Order started including lizardfolk and treefolk field agents, but over time, the logistics system absorbed their culture and it became second nature to cater for their unique needs. That said, lizard folks were generally able to consume and tolerate a vast amount of foods, and so, they were not hard to integrate. In time, it may be the Magisarians that will change, or the Order as a whole figured out how to better support them. Lozon eventually led them to the walls. There were 3 layers of walls, and though it was quite unnecessary given the Order's strength, it was the locals that needed convincing. For an added sense of security, there were large magical barriers erected to give the newly settled natives a perception of security. It was partly performative, since the shields were only strong enough to protect against enemies of the demon champion's level. Ultimately, their real defense force was the deployed Valtrian Order, and the local militia. Are there native monsters? Aben looked about, and across the horizon. I've only seen demons since we've arrived. Yes, Lozon said. But they are rare for now. They should start spawning once the druids get to work and push back the corruption. Also, since you guys are here, wanna help me get some fresh air? Oh, Lozon grinned, and stretched. They went on a demon hunting spree. Delvegard. It was a quiet time in the dwarven towns of Delvegard. The appeal of small towns was always its relative obscurity, and that was what drew the dwarves to live in such places. Peace. Free from the usual tussles for Sunsteel and the mines. Free from the rough, chaotic warfare that are the machine wars. So, the recent changes were met with mixed reactions. Not everyone wanted the attention, because it affected their peace. Yet, the Valtrian presence brought much needed food security. It was a trade-off that the dwarves begrudgingly accepted, because food was a pain. Security was something that could be fixed. The strange dwarves from beyond brought a tree that magically grew within their town, and the locals now had to produce equipment to trade for food. It was at a very good rate, and so that was highly appealing to the local dwarves, but it was a strange, unusual practice to trade with a tree. The central equipment purchasing hall was located right next to that node tree, a dark brown-colored tree that's 6 stories tall and its trunk was the size of 2 houses across. There was a cavity in the center, the place where everything appeared, and vanished. Even people. The ruling Lord, Sundus, found it amusing that the rumors are so crazy. It was a rumor. A curiosity. It was often whispered that people could be eaten by the tree, though they would then see those people reappear some time later. For now, it seemed as if it was a magical tree that traded food for crafts. If only they could see where they lead to, or the links that tree represented. He tried explaining it to the local craftsmen that it led to other worlds, but all the local dwarves did was stare at him like he was mad. He'd love to see their reaction when he'd send them away for the first time. It would be something he'd carve to his memories. For now, to the locals, it was a tree that traded food for crafts. Crafts and goods went in, food came out the other side. Of course, the locals didn't trade with the tree directly. They traded with Sundus's men, but the locals were curious, and they saw how his people moved the goods to that cavity, and then it just vanished. So, it is known to the locals as a magical trading tree. A few locals even tried sneaking in, perhaps the result of being a little too intoxicated at the local tavern, and tried trading with the tree directly. One of them claimed to have heard a voice in his head. The rest of them just laughed it off as drunken hallucinations. Eon would speak to them one day. Then they would know the truth. For now, they waited. Sundus knew the plan for Delvegard mainly hinged on Alka's return. The return of the alchemist of bombs would then shift their plans on Delvegard forward. For now, the Lord focused on shoring up their position, and setting the field. News, especially amusing news like the magical trading tree, spread quickly. It attracted the presence of neighbors, and faraway travelers. Sundus could see them. Many of them were obviously not traders, but these so-called traders pretended to visit the local market. But they tried the magic trading tree anyway, and his men were willing to trade anyway. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was curiosity. Dwarves were proud, but they were not stupid. Curiosities could mutate into a bigger problem. The dwarven lords from the nearby nations were curious. They've all heard of the alliance of dwarven towns. The so-called small group, backed by strange tall folks and their unusual equipment. Sometimes, Sundus wondered what they discovered. But so far, Valthorn's presence remained fairly small, and spread across all the smaller towns, and they were all shrouded in a fairly thick layer of disguises to throw off most onlookers. After watching these spies try the trading tree and furiously write notes, Sundus decided to go and chat. They were clearly not very good spies, and their disdain leaked through their words. They were curious, but from what Sundus could tell, they were mostly not worried. For now, they are unusual, but nothing to be worried about. None of the large dwarven groups have set their sights on them. They held no large sunsteel or sunmetal veins. They were not aware of the Valthorn's secret mines nearby. They didn't have any of the Colossus war machines. Why should they be worried? Nothing they've seen so far threatened to upset the status quo. Would they react differently once they met someone like Alka? Sundus tried his best not to grin. He liked this feeling. He thoroughly enjoyed it when people looked down on them, only to be proven wrong. He totally couldn't wait for the day for the domain holder to visit Delvegard. Landis. Lumuf stood at the entrance to the pit, as all the domain holders gathered to purge the first visited peripheral world of its Demon King. The Demon King was down there, and he could feel its presence. It wasn't digging. It was still digging a few weeks ago. But not anymore. It stopped once it sensed the heroes all reappearing nearby. It had some intelligence to know the heroes came for it. The hero, Samuel, stood nearby, along with the rest of the heroes. Weira and Raja, surprisingly, decided to join them. It's down there. Samuel, or as the locals called him, Samahiro said, his finger pointed to the pit. I hear it calling. He was stronger, but somehow, it didn't matter. The fear was real. The impact of the demonic curse was so strong that it messed with some of the hero class's usual mental protections. Lumuf nodded anyway. Have no fear, Samuel. Colette said. You are not alone, this time. Somehow, those words made Samuel tear up a little. His eyes seemed a little reddish, and he rubbed it away. It was not the time to show weakness, as he tried his best to show an expression of determination. Shall we lure it out, or does it want us to go down there to it? Colette then looked at Lumuf. He shrugged. Edna, I think let's lure it out. We'll have better escape options fighting out here. Sounds good. Lumuf nodded, as he walked over the edge, and fell into the pit. All right then. You guys wait here. The heroes looked at each other, and Samuel looked worried. He didn't need to be. The Demon King wasn't that strong, and in avatar mode, fighting underground where a tree's roots could grow and gain control of the environment was thoroughly advantageous to Lumuf, so the Demon King, predictably, chose to escape from the depths. The Demon King came out to meet its death. It was fast. It was undramatic. It was just a flurry of colors and lights, as so many heroes and domain holders worked together to destroy a single Demon King. It died so quickly that the battle lasted no more than an hour. For that hour, the world momentarily shook as a huge surge of magic crushed the Demon King, and so Landis became another peripheral world freed of its Demon King. Just like Raja and Weira, a strange sensation vanished from Samuel's heart. Everyone still had places to go. The domain holders had tasks to do. With Landis freed, the demonic rift gates collapsed, and the demonic invasion ended. Reconstruction could now go full throttle.